Hey guys, tonight we're voyaging back to a time when the Valley of Mexico was a patchwork of marshes, hills, and whispering cottonwoods, and you're about to watch one of its villages light up like the dawning sun. You might not survive the first day, if by surviving you mean keeping your sandals clean in all that red dust. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and what time it is for you right now in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're joining me from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off a jagged rock onto the parched plains just northeast of what will one day be Mexico City. A soft wind carries the scent of damp reeds and ripe squash. Around you, small huts of mud and cane huddle like a flock of birds settling for the night. This is before fame, before pyramids, before the world knew the name Teotihuacan. Here, you are witness to the birth of a city destined to be called the place of the gods by later generations, and more colloquially, the Sun City. In this season, roughly 100 BCE, you feel the air thick with possibility. Mainstream scholarship tells us these early settlers are descendants of the local Tlatilco and Coquilco people, who domesticated maize and teosinte centuries earlier. They've dragged earthen baskets of soil from the surrounding hills to build modest terraces for their fields. You watch as they press kernels of maize into the soft earth, hoping for sprouts that will sustain generations. As the sun drifts behind a distant hill, you wander down a low causeway laid in crushed limestone. Your sandals stir up a fine pink dust that glints in the dying light. You notice small impressions on the road. Footprints of barefoot children, perhaps the ones racing each other at dawn. This road is unremarkable now, but in the decades ahead it will stretch far beyond this settlement, eventually earning the grand name, Avenue of the Dead. Did you know that some archaeologists believe the earliest builders oriented the main streets 15.5 degrees east of true north to align with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster? It's an obscure trick of cosmic choreography, one that would have looked like a careful wink at the heavens for anyone standing just so on a pyramid platform. You duck into a low-dome structure made of cane and coated in plaster, a prototype of the apartment compounds that will one day house thousands. Inside, you find a crude hearth flanked by stone manos and metates. A woman leans over a grinding stone, her rhythmic motion sending echoes through the dim interior. She's grinding maize not just into masa, but into the very identity of this fledgling community. A hush falls as you step outside to the edge of a marsh. Here, reeds sway in lazy ripples, and a family tends to chinampa beds, floating gardens anchored by stakes. You kneel at the water's edge and see guava seeds stuck to your fingers. A child calls out, "Great harvest tomorrow." The excitement is genuine. A decent crop could mean extra dried squash stored for the season's hunger. Historians are still debating this question. Was chinampa agriculture introduced here by locals experimenting with lake-edge wetlands, or borrowed from Gulf Coast techniques heard about only in rumor? Either way, you sense the spirit of invention. Above you, a flock of white egrets wheels in slow arcs. You watch one bird descend and pluck a fish from knee-deep water. It flicks its head as if savoring an ancient triumph, the triumph of life in a land that often feels too dry. As night deepens, you see faint embers glowing from a communal fire framed by poles waiting to carry a new roof. You imagine the sound of children's laughter mingling with crackling flames and stories of earlier clans. Stories that will soon blend into a grander myth of city founders. Over the next few decades, these small settlements begin to coalesce under a shared ritual center constructed of rammed earth. You see workers hauling baskets of clay and giving each other wry grins when someone's load spills into the dust. Classic human moment, no matter the millennium. The centerpiece rises, a broad platform coated in red stucco, intended for ceremonies honoring the sun at its zenith. You climb provisional wooden scaffolding, each rung wobbly under your weight. From this vantage, the valley unfurls like a painted scroll. Marshes, hills, distant volcanoes faint against the horizon. Here's another tidbit you might not expect. Some researchers recently unearthed fragments of mica mixed in that red stucco, giving it a subtle sparkle when the morning rays hit just right. No one's quite sure why, but it's a reminder that even in its infancy, this place glimmered with showmanship. Below, laborers heft giant stone manos, unaware that hundreds of years later, tourists will marvel that they moved multi-ton blocks without oxen or iron tools. They'd use human chains and wooden levers, trusting muscle and ingenuity over brute technology. As you descend, the lower terraces gather plaster puddles from an afternoon rain. You lift a hand to catch droplets and taste the mineral tang. Life here will revolve around these seasonal rains, with good monsoons, grain surpluses, with drought, the specter of famine. By 50 CE, the red platform has grown into a stepped pyramid twice the height of any structure in surrounding villages. Priests hold trance-like rituals atop it, calling down the sun's power with incense of copal resin. You stand among onlookers in a hush, as if the world itself holds its breath. You notice a figure at the edge of the crowd, a tall person draped in jaguar skins, wearing an obsidian-bladed dagger at their waist. They signal to laborers below. You squint. Is this a local chieftain, or someone who traveled from far-flung Zapotec lands? Historians are still debating this question. In the gathering dusk, you follow flickering torches to a nascent plaza where dozens of huts cluster. You peer inside one and see a child clutching a clay whistle shaped like a rabbit. That whistle will one day be a prized artifact, discovered by explorers treading here 2,000 years later. Higher above, crowned by rough stone, a second, smaller temple begins to mirror its larger sibling. Locals start calling the great monument the Sun Pyramid, and the pair a cosmic duet. Together, they signal a new order. Villages surrender local gods in favor of sun-centered worship. As you wander home beneath a sky prickled with stars, you feel the pulse of something grand awakening. You're standing at the instant before dawn, the instant before this humble settlement blooms into an empire of stone and legend. You pause at the lip of your hut's threshold, heart still thrumming. Tomorrow you might wake to find the platform extended again. You step off the raised causeway into a swath of fertile floodplain rimmed by rolling hills and telltale willow stands. The sun is gentle at dawn, and a thin mist clings to the low fields where your neighbors have already begun their morning chores. This is about 50 BCE, just as the first stirrings of agriculture are transforming nomadic bands into settled villagers, pioneers who will shape the destiny of Teotihuacan centuries before its grand pyramids rise. Tonight, you witness the hard-won triumphs and small frustrations of the valley's earliest farmers, people whose daily lives are woven from seed, soil, and stubborn invention. You wander past a cluster of round, cane and mud huts arranged around a central plaza. Gray-white plaster peels in occasional patches, revealing the bundled reeds beneath. There's a gentle aroma of cooking smoke, maize dough warming on flat stones. You brush your fingertips across a wooden grinding slab, meditate, and feel the grooves worn by hands just like yours over countless dawns. Over in one corner, a small child chases a scurrying agouti, shrieking with delight when the rodent darts under a basket trap. This playful scene echoes across time. Children have always been experts at finding mischief, even when you have to guard the harvest from both critters and curious siblings. You pause by a field of young maize stalks, each about knee-height and tied loosely to slender reeds. The plants rise in neat rows across a slight terrace, an early example of hillside agriculture that protects the tender shoots from seasonal runoff. Maize, or plant of the gods, as later generations will call it, is already the lifeblood of this community. These farmers cultivate a primitive, teosinte-derived variety that yields small ears, just 8 or 12 kernels each, but enough for daily tortillas and tamales. Mainstream scholarship tells us that by 2000 BCE, people in central Mexico had domesticated maize, but refinement continues here. Selective breeding in the Teotihuacan Valley over the next centuries will increase ear size dramatically, a process that took thousands of careful plantings and ruthless culling of weak stalks. As you walk, you notice a narrow irrigation ditch running along the field's edge. Crystal clear water trickles from a nearby spring, diverted by woven reeds and lined with cobbles. The engineer in you admires the simple efficiency. No bronze tools, just polished stone hose and wooden levers. According to one obscure study, these early waterways included minute sediment traps made of clay mixed with ground seashells. an innovation previously thought exclusive to coastal societies. This tiny detail, hidden in a footnote, reminds you that geniuses often leave footprints in the mud. A thin young woman appears with a woven basket brimming with freshly harvested beans. She greets you shyly, then dumps the beans onto a broadleaf mat for sorting. These beans, Phaseolus vulgaris, will add vital protein to the maize diet. Nearby, another villager prunes a patch of chili peppers, their red fruit still too small to bite. Squash vines creep along low ridges, their broad leaves shading the soil and keeping moisture in. In this three sisters triad, each plant supports the others. Beans climb maize stalks, squash leaves suppress weeds. Maize poles stand upright in return for beans' nitrogen-enriching touch. The partnership works so well that it will become a staple pattern across the Americas for millennia. You crouch to examine the soil. Crumbly, dark, imbued with organic matter. A century from now, when archaeologists dig here, they'll find charred grain husks and broken grinding stones. They'll note that villagers temper their pottery with local volcanic sand, a choice that gives early bowls extra strength. That tempering trick is a bit of a cold nugget for modern archaeologists, since similar sand-tempered ware appears thousands of miles away in Oaxaca at the same period. Historians are still debating this question. Were these communities trading pots north-south, or did the technology diffuse independently through parallel invention? A dog ambles by, its ribs showing through patchy fur. You pat its head, and silently marvel that the ancestors here are among the earliest to keep domesticated dogs not just as companions, but as beasts of burden. Those shishi dogs, about the size of a coyote, help pull small sleds laden with maize cobs or baskets of firewood. It's a charming image. You, a sleepy YouTube host turned time traveler, scratching a dog who will one day ensure you have fuel to cook your evening meal. In the distance, gulls cry overhead. You look up to see Lake Texcoco's shimmering waters lapping against reeds. Fishermen in simple dugout canoes cast woven nets into shallow bays, pulling in mojara and catfish. The catch will supply protein for drying racks, and broken fish bones will end up mixed with lime as mortar for the next generation of hut floors. One obscure lesson here: early inhabitants sometimes used fish scales crushed into paint, giving murals a subtle iridescence no one has yet fully explained. Wandering back toward the communal plaza, you come upon a reedy enclosure where women stomp on pulque agave hearts, extracting sweet sap for fermentation. This proto-pulque is more of a lightly fizzy tonic than a potent inebriant, just enough to warm spirits after the day's labor. You take a small sip, feeling the tang of the valley's minerals. It's not exactly tequila, obviously. Agave distillation won't arrive for another millennium, but it's a reminder that every process has a humble origin. By midday, the sun reaches its zenith and the valley hums with activity. Men sharpen obsidian blades against sandstone cores, producing razor-sharp knives for fieldwork and butchery. These blades are prized export. Traders will one day carry obsidian from this valley to distant highlands and coastal markets. You examine a freshly flaked chip. Its edges gleam like broken glass. An obscure statistic: Teotihuacan's obsidian trade network later spans some 1,000 kilometers, making it one of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica's greatest economic engines. Yet already you're seeing its earliest drafts. Over by the plaza's edge, a low platform of rammed earth hosts a small crowd. A village elder stands before them, clutching a wooden staff carved with snake motifs. He intones blessings to the rain deity, Tlaloc, hoping for midday clouds to drift in and quell the baking heat. You step closer, catching the tremor in his voice, a reminder that life here balances on the whims of seasonal monsoons. Some years bring bountiful rains, others drought that chokes the land. Historians are still debating this question. Did extended dry spells or social conflict trigger the later population shifts, or was it a more complex interplay of factors? Tonight, you sense that uncertainty as you watch villagers tilt skyward, eyes searching for distant thunderheads. A group of children mulberries to each other while peeking through woven fences at a pair of jaguars tethered by soft leather thongs. The cats are part of a sacred menagerie kept by shamans. Their presence symbolizes power over life's raw forces. You nervously sidestep when a low growl rumbles through the compound. Despite your modern fallback instinct to say, "Hey, get off my lawn," you keep a respectful distance. Even in 50 BCE, housecats aren't quite your nocturnal allies. As the afternoon heat wanes, women gather pottery fragments to craft new bowls. They stack shards into a ring and cover them with clay slip, then fire the vessels in open hearth pits. Each pot is a canvas. Painted lines in crimson and black hint at swirling maize motifs. One obscure tidbit. Some pigments incorporate mineral malachite, which yields green hues rare in this era. Its presence here suggests either local mineral poaching or trade with Gulf Coast sources. But the full story remains buried, literally and figuratively, in future excavation layers. You drift toward a low hut where a mother styles her son's hair with ochre paste, an early cosmetic ritual that signals coming of age. He stands stiffly as she twists his locks into tiny knots, then affixes a clay bead in the center. That bead will survive centuries, picked up by modern archaeologists who marvel at its craftsmanship. You crack a small joke in your head. Bet he never imagined being TikTok famous 2 millennia later. The pun is lost on the boy, of course, but the moment is human enough to bridge time's yawning gulf. In the waning light, workers haul baskets of earth to build a new terrace platform at the edge of the settlement. You join them, hefting a loosely woven basket onto your back. The weight jolts your spine, but you grin at the communal effort. Voices call out measurements and leveling instructions, evidence of organizational skills more sophisticated than you'd expect from a village just discovering agriculture. This is not pure chaos. Already you sense a proto-bureaucracy forming, one that centuries later will oversee vast public works. Nearby, a skinny musician tucks a clay flute between his lips and plays a low, mournful tune. The haunting notes drift across the fields, blending with chattering children and bleating dogs. Music permeates every corner of life, from religious rites to simple dances around hearth fires. You tap your finger on a stone ledge, instinctively matching his rhythm. Feeling oddly, you step onto a broad, leveled surface that stretches farther than your eyes can comfortably take in. A vast plaza of crushed limestone and compacted red earth that feels almost otherworldly underfoot. The morning sun glints off tiny quartz fragments mixed into the dust, creating a subtle sparkle that makes you blink twice. This is not a natural clearing but the handiwork of hundreds, soon to be thousands, of laborers who have spent seasons hauling baskets of fill, tamping it down in uniform layers. In this moment, you realize you're standing at the heart of an urban revolution. The first strokes of a city plan so bold it will echo through history. All around you, straight lines carve the landscape into neat quadrants. Broad avenues intersect at right angles, delineating blocks that will one day host residential compounds, workshops, and ceremonial centers. The main thoroughfare, later known as the Avenue of the Dead, slices through the city's core, running almost due north-south but tilted ever so slightly eastward. Mainstream scholarship attributes this grid, unusual in Mesoamerica, to deliberate urban planning aimed at imposing cosmic order onto the land. It's a remarkable departure from the more organic village clusters you visited in the valley's early days. You crouch to trace the edge of one avenue where the compacted surface meets a parallel trench. A trickle of clear water still flows in places, diverted from an underground spring through woven reed channels. Incredibly, early engineers here created primitive sediment traps, little dams of clay mixed with volcanic ash, to keep silt from clogging the conduits. It's an obscure detail that survived only in a single footnote of an esoteric journal article, but it hints at the technical savvy driving this city's birth. As you wander along the edge of a block, you note the precise orientation. Roughly 15.5 degrees east of true north, aligning the city with the horizon point where the Pleiades set on certain winter nights. This cosmic wink isn't accidental. Astronomical alignments thread through Teotihuacan's plan, binding earth and sky. Yet some scholars argue it's an adaptation to the slope of the valley floor rather than purely celestial devotion. Historians are still debating this question. You step over a low curb, each block is raised a few centimeters above street level, guiding rainwater toward central drains. Lift your head and you see tall platforms rising at block corners. These early platforms, coated in white plaster, will support small shrines or administrative structures. In the distance, the rising bulk of the Pyramid of the Sun looms like a promise. For now, you're drawn to the residential compounds called tekpan, each a self-contained neighborhood. Cross the threshold of one compound and you find a courtyard ringed by stone benches and flanking rooms. The walls are coated in smooth stucco, painted in vivid reds and yellows. Inside, doorways rise just over your head, tall enough to feel grand, low enough to remind you of human scale. Each room connects to the next, forming a labyrinth of chambers for families of 50 or more. Modern excavations reveal hundreds of such compounds, suggesting a population nearing 100,000 at the city's height. Amazingly, nearly every compound follows a standard plan. Central courtyard, storage rooms on two sides, living quarters on another, and narrow workshops on the fourth. Obscure as it sounds, this repetitive module implies a proto-bureaucracy capable of enforcing architectural uniformity. No small feat without scribes or blueprints in the modern sense. It's like discovering thousands of cookie-cutter houses erected by a hive mind, each one whispering of centralized oversight. In the corner of the courtyard, you find a small basin carved from volcanic stone. It's stained green with malachite residue, an early experiment in decorative pools. Looking closely, you see flecks of mica embedded in the plaster, causing the basin to shimmer in torchlight. No one's entirely sure why these artisans mixed the glittering mineral here. Theories range from ritual sparkle to simple showmanship. That tiny mystery still tickles archaeologists today. You wander back onto the plaza, marveling at the scale. The width of each avenue is consistent, about 16 meters, wide enough for processions of priests carrying banners and incense. Sidewalks of stone slabs edge the roads, raised a few centimeters so pedestrians can keep their patrician sandals clean. Beneath these sidewalks, you glimpse narrow drainage channels, evidence of sophisticated urban hydrology. Rainwater management was a priority. Seasonal downpours could have otherwise washed away the plaster and rendered the streets impassable. Step off one avenue into a smaller street, and you notice the paving stones are irregular in shape but carefully fitted. Gaps between stones form straight lines, like careful stitching, channeling water into side gutters. These channels funnel into larger conduits leading back to that canal you saw by the entrance. It's a subtle brilliance. No single feature dominates, but together they create a resilient network. Towering above you now is a rectangular platform that will become part of the massive temple of the feathered serpent. Already you see the talatablero profile taking shape, sloping lower panels topped by vertical receding panels. Scholars note that this style spreads from Teotihuacan to distant cities like Tikal. Yet exactly how and why it propagated remains unclear. Historians are still debating this question. You climb provisional wooden scaffolding to glimpse the skyline. From here, the city resembles a stone ocean, punctuated by pyramids and platforms rather than waves. Beyond the sea of buildings, you spot the twin volcanoes Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl rising ghostly against the horizon. The view is so vast it makes your chest tighten, a reminder that human ambition often towers over personal limits. Back on solid ground, you peek through an open doorway into a workshop. The artisan inside is shaping an obsidian blade, tapping flakes from a core with a deer antler batten. You hold the chip by its corner and feel its edge, razor sharp. Soon these blades will be snapped and ground into small knives, axes, and spear points, fueling a trade network that will stretch hundreds of kilometers. All of this logistical complexity, extraction, distribution, specialization, has roots in the city's careful planning. Wandering further, you find a small shrine built into one compound's courtyard. Inside, a mural depicts a stylized mountain and stepped pyramid, painted in faded reds and oranges. It's one of the earliest cityscapes ever rendered in Mesoamerica. Beneath it, offerings of pottery shards and tiny greenstone beads remain sealed in plaster. Coffee bean-sized nuggets that shine more brightly to you than any gem. In another block, you hear the hiss of steam. A kiln fills the air with acrid smoke as potters fire cylindrical vessels painted with lightning motifs. These kilns sit in special enclosures with low roofs to contain heat. The blackened bricks bear scorch marks from dozens of firings. Nearby, Vendors spread trays of maize breads and roasted squash seeds for sale, suggesting a nascent marketplace. Another urban innovation. Turning east, you enter a plaza dominated by a tall column of smooth, white stucco. It's the base of a future palace, marked by two long benches carved directly from the bedrock. Legend has it that visiting dignitaries from distant lands were entertained here, though some argue it was a civic gathering spot. Historians are still debating this question. You wander under an archway where two columns support a simple lintel. A guard post? A ceremonial portal? No one's entirely certain. Recent excavations uncovered a cache of greenstone figurines beneath the threshold, a sort of foundation deposit meant to bless the structure. This surprise find reminds you that beneath every stone lies a secret waiting to be unearthed. In the shade of that lintel, you pause to consider the interplay of public and private spaces. Compounds cluster in blocks that feel intimate, but the avenues remain vast and open. There are no fortified walls encircling the city, unusual for a metropolis of this size. Some propose Teotihuacan was an egalitarian paradise. Others point to evidence of watchtowers on city fringes. Historians are still debating this question. As midday heat softens, you slip into a narrow corridor between two compounds. Its walls bear traces of soot from torches, suggesting these alleys saw nighttime activity. In the hush, you almost expect to hear voices plotting civic decrees or artists humming ritual songs. You linger, imagining yourself as one of the city's emerging administrators, taking midnight readings of water tables and sky alignments. Emerging again onto the plaza, you catch sight of a group of workers laying down additional layers of white stucco. They mix lime with powdered seashell and walk backward, smoothing it with flat stones. The pristine sheen will eventually fade to pale gray, but for now it dazzles. You shade your eyes and notice they've added small pockets of red ochre along edges, an aesthetic touch that highlights corners and entrances. You continue eastward until you find a pair of small fountains fed by the same spring you saw by the avenue's entrance. Water bubbles through carved stone spouts, collecting in shallow basins before spilling over. You arrive before dawn at the western flank of the Pyramid of the Sun, where the earth still holds the memory of footsteps from centuries past. A thin veil of mist clings to the tiers above you, softening the rough edges of ancient stone. You tuck a loose strand of hair behind your ear, adjust your simple linen tunic, and take a slow breath of the chill morning air. Ahead, the pyramid's massive core, a backbone of rubble and adobe bricks, rises in step tiers toward the pale light. Tonight's focus is on raising this colossal monument, the largest pre-Columbian structure in the Americas, without so much as a draft animal or a single iron tool. If the thought alone doesn't give you chills, wait until you feel the first baskets of earth in your arms. By the time the sun peaks above Mount Tlaloc, you've already joined the labor brigade, one of dozens tasked with ferrying fill to the growing platform. Mainstream scholarship dates the initial phase of construction to around 100 CE, when the first broad platform was laid down over earlier ceremonial mounds. A century later, between 200 and 250 CE, the pyramid was expanded to its full height of roughly 75 meters, dwarfing any structure you've ever encountered. You heft a cracked clay basket, woven reeds reinforced with lime mortar, into which you shovel a feral blend of red volcanic ash, crushed limestone, and broken pottery fragments. Your shoulders ache almost immediately, a reminder that ancient builders never had access to back braces or ibuprofen. A master surveyor stands on a low platform to your left, clutching a crude gnomon, a wooden staff whose shadow tracks the sun's drift across the sky. He's marking reference points for the next tier, his assistants sketching chalk lines on the stone below. Obscure studies suggest that these surveyors sometimes used cornmeal laid in straight furrows as temporary guides, an ephemeral trick that leaves no trace for archaeologists centuries later. You witness him pause, squinting as the gnomon's tip aligns with a notch carved into a volcanic block. Such precision to within a few centimeters across hundreds of meters feels like a cosmic joke. Marble palaces in bygone Europe lack these exacting solar alignments. As you trudge up the ramp of packed earth, you brush against wooden lever posts braced along its edges. Baskets of fill are hauled upward by human chains. Workers at the bottom push, at the top pull, swapping places when muscles tire. The rhythm is surprisingly musical. Thump thump, heave heave, a grunt here, a laugh there. One friend quips that if you survive today without twisting an ankle, you'll earn bragging rights back in your home compound. You reply that bragging rights are overrated until tomorrow, when you won't be able to lift your own tunic. Obscure fact time. Beneath your feet on one of the ramps you glimpse a scattering of mica flakes embedded in dried stucco. These shiny particles catch the light as you pass, a deliberate flourish meant to make the pyramid glint like a jewel at sunrise. No one's quite certain whether the mica came from nearby veins or was traded from distant highland mines, but the effect must have been dazzling. It's a small reminder that, for all its hulking mass, the builders cared about spectacle. You reach a resting ledge at mid-ramp. From here, you catch a glimpse of the sprawling city below. Blocks of white-plastered compounds, the avenue of the dead cutting straight toward the horizon, the twin volcanoes looming sentinel-like in the distance. Your chest tightens at the scale of it all. The air smells of wet clay, incense smoke drifting from a shrine on a nearby platform. You pause, offering your own silent prayer to the sun god at the summit. Historians are still debating this question. Was the pyramid dedicated to a specific sun deity, or did it serve as a general cosmic axis for multiple cults? Whatever its theological label, you feel the weight of belief pressing like a silent drumbeat. After swallowing a mouthful of dried maize and amaranth paste, you head to the pyramid's eastern face, where a team is mixing plaster for the next revetment. They combine lime from crushed shells, sand from the riverbed, and a secret binder. Some suggest crushed cochineal scales, though that might just be legend. You kneel beside them, stirring the paste with a flat wooden paddle, careful not to leave thick lumps. One of the plasterers jokes that you're hiring out as a pyramid chef now. You laugh, but your forearms tremble. Nearby, a shaman priest performs a ritual blessing of the stones. He sprinkles copal incense over a cache of small ceramic figurines, obsidian-tipped spears, clay models of pumas, and miniature greenstone masks. You kneel respectfully, wondering whether these were buried intentionally as spiritual anchors or merely forgotten offerings. Historians are still debating this question, because evidence is fragmentary and often contradictory. Nonetheless, the air tastes of resin and sage, and you feel that building this pyramid is as much a spiritual endeavor as a political one. As midday approaches, the rampway echoes with the sound of flint chisels striking volcanic rock. Stonecutters chisel blocks that will form the pyramid's facing stones. Each block is roughly 2 feet square and weighs about 500 pounds. You help carry a smaller slab, still heavy enough to test your grip. The workers align the stone against the step edge, tap it with wooden mallets, and apply a thin bed of fresh plaster to bind it in place. An engineer overseeing the process nods, then signals for another block to be hoisted. He mumbles in Nahuatl. Your ear is rusty, but you catch the phrase for perfect fit. You slip aside to avoid a cascade of chippings as the stonemasons smooth a previously placed block surface. The residual dust coats your lips with a chalky tang. Beneath you, the core's inner chambers, tunnels constructed to relieve weight and possibly hold shrine rooms, demand ultra care. You glimpse an opening leading into a dim passage where smoke from earlier ceremonies lingers. Inside, torchlight reveals walls blackened by centuries of incense. Unusual carvings depict a coiled serpent clasping a solar disk, images that predate the famous feathered serpent temple by decades. Such precursors hint at evolving iconography you can't fully decipher. Rising heat drives you toward the pyramid's summit platform, now swathed in fresh stucco. You climb the final 260 steps, each one carved into the packed core and covered with limestone slabs. By the time you reach the top, sweat soaks your back. The summit feels cavernous, more like a broad terrace than a typical temple peak. At its center sits a low altar of basalt, scarred by countless libations of bloodless offerings. Flowers, maize, obsidian flakes. You kneel, arms trembling, and lift your face to the blazing sky. A band of temple attendants surrounds you, their feathered headdresses bobbing with each movement. They chant in deep tonal resonance, calling on the sun's life-giving warmth. You join softly, your voice cracking on the unfamiliar pitch. After a few minutes, The sun's zenith crest sends a brilliant shaft of light across the courtyard below. You blink, overwhelmed by the interplay of sound, light, and human devotion. Building this pyramid feels like orchestrating the heavens themselves. Descending carefully, you pause at each tier to stretch your shoulders. You notice mortar oozing from between stones, a sign that some repairs are already necessary, even at this stage. Lightning strikes or seismic tremors could destabilize the structure, prompting future builders to reinforce the facade. Obscure as it may be, evidence of small repair patches has been found in hidden niches, suggesting that maintenance began almost immediately after completion. By mid-afternoon, the pyramid stands complete for the season, its silhouette etched sharply against a cloudless sky. You join fellow workers as they clear away tools, stone chisels, wooden paddles, woven baskets, stacking them neatly in nearby storage pens. The sense of collective triumph hums through the air. In a few hours, celebratory drums will sound from the Pyramid of the Moon across the plaza, signaling the end of this labor cycle. You linger at the base as the sun dips westward, watching golden rays gild the pyramid's tiers. One companion remarks that if you squint, the structure seems to pulse like a living being, an apt metaphor for a city whose heart still beats in every stone. You smile, imagining future tourists craning their necks to see this marvel. They'll stand where you stand now, marveling at human will and forgetting the aches in their shoulders. As dusk deepens, you make your way back along the Avenue of the Dead, the pyramid's outline fading into silhouette behind you. The evening wind carries the scent of cooking chilies and roasted maize from the city's markets. You join a small gathering around a fire pit, a shared meal of bean stew, toasted amaranth sprouts, and a sip of fermented agave. Among soft laughter and hushed gratitude, you realize that raising the Pyramid of the Sun was never just about stone and labor. It was about forging community and faith in stone. You lie back on a woven mat, gazing up at the darkening sky where stars begin to blink. The pyramid looms even larger in the night, a silent sentinel over the city's dreams. Sleep tugs at your eyelids, bringing welcome relief to your sore muscles. Yet even in dreams, you approach the western base of the Pyramid of the Moon just as the afternoon light softens, turning the limestone facade a gentle honey hue. Mist from the nearby marshes caresses the lower terraces, lending a dreamlike quality to the grand steps before you. You pause at the foot of the pyramid, now the city's second-largest structure, and take in its monumental symmetry. 5 staggered platforms rising in precise succession, each one slightly smaller than the one below, culminating in a broad plaza. This is the Moon Temple, where the celestial and terrestrial realms converge, and tonight you will step into ceremonies that bridge earth and sky. Stepping onto the lowest tier, your sandals crunch on pale gravel mixed with crushed volcanic rock. Archaeological surveys date the initial construction of this pyramid to around 200 CE, roughly contemporaneous with the final enlargement of the Sun Pyramid. Mainstream scholarship tells us that Teotihuacanos carved a central plaza atop a hill called Cerro Gordo, then built this stepped monument to honor lunar phases, water cycles, and perhaps a great goddess of fertility. You feel the weight of that legacy beneath your feet, as if each stone knows the countless rituals performed here. You ascend the first flight of steps, your hand trailing along the worn edge of a carved jamb. The grooves are soft from centuries of believers' fingertips. At each landing, you glimpse niches once filled with offerings. Ceramic figurines, greenstone beads, and shells from the Gulf Coast. Obscure studies suggest that mollusk shells were ground into pigment to paint the pyramid's surfaces a faint bluish-green hue, an allusion to water and fertility that has eluded modern scientific confirmation. You wonder if those subtle washes of color ever caught moonlight and glowed like phosphorescence. Reaching the third platform, you turn to look down the Avenue of the Dead. The view is breathtaking. Masses of plastered compounds form waves of pale rectangles, all leading your eye toward the horizon, where Popocatépetl exhales gentle smoke. From here, the Moon Pyramid feels like a cosmic gateway, framing sky and city in perfect geometric alignment. Some scholars propose this orientation was meant to track Venus rather than the Moon, a hypothesis still under active debate. Historians are still debating this question. Was the temple's axis intended for lunar observation, planetary alignment, or seasonal calendrical markers. You sense that the accuracy of this cosmic choreography rests on millennia-old surveying and sky-watching expertise. You climb to the fourth tier, where a narrow ledge offers a shallow channel carved into the stone. Water would have flowed here during rainstorms, cascading down to create a soothing backdrop for rituals. Freshwater management atop a pyramid this size is no small feat. The carved channels lead to drainage shafts within the core, diverting excess water to avoid structural damage. This hydrological sophistication ranks among Mesoamerica's earliest large-scale engineering feats, a testament to Teotihuacan's blend of ritual and practicality. An attendant steps forward, his face painted with chalk-white patterns and a crescent moon emblem over his right eye. He invites you to join the circle at the summit, where a low altar of basalt awaits. For braziers stand at the corners, already crackling with copal incense. The air is thick with resinous smoke, carrying the sweet, pine-like scent to your lungs. You inhale deeply, feeling both grounded and suspended, as if you stand between two worlds. A drummer begins a slow heartbeat rhythm on a mammoth drum made from stretched jaguar hide. The deep thud vibrates through your chest, syncing with your pulse. Another musician clinks a pair of snail-shell rattles, their muted tinkling weaving around the drumbeat. You feel your heart lighten even as it pounds, a paradox befitting a ceremony meant to straddle mortal and divine realms. It's a small wonder that Teotihuacan's soundscape influenced distant cultures. Ceremonial music would later emerge in Mayan courts and Zapotec ball courts. Obscure knowledge for you. Some specialists propose that participants chewed seeds of Mexican morning glory, Ipomoea tricolor, to induce mild visions during these ceremonies, interpreting lunar reflections as omens. While carbonized seed remains have been found near the summit, their identification remains tentative. Whether they were hallucinogens, ritual incense, or simple foodstuffs continues to puzzle archaeologists. You step into the center of the summit plaza, where 4 priests kneel around the altar. One takes a shell bowl filled with fermented agave, a precursor to pulque, and offers you a sip. The liquid is frothy, slightly sour, with a subtle trace of earth. You lift the bowl as instructed, letting the drink lap at your lips. It warms your throat, loosening your limbs, and you feel the vigil shift from solemn to celebratory. Behind you, a carved relief in the stucco wall catches your eye. A stylized face with feline features, eyes half closed as if in trance, and a headdress of overlapping feathers. This iconography, an early depiction of the so-called storm god, foreshadows later Teotihuacan emphasis on the feathered serpent. The relief's lines are crisp despite weathering. An obscure study suggests the original artists used a binding agent of ground lime mixed with orchid resins to stabilize pigments. You marvel at how such botanical additives have resisted millennia of erosion. As the drumming slows, the chief priest raises a polished mirror of obsidian to catch the setting sun's final rays, then shifts it upward toward the waxing moon beginning its ascent. The mirror's surface, dark as night, reflects a pinpoint of celestial light that seems to wink at you. The alignment is perfect, sun's echo meeting moon's promise. You sense the entwined symbolism, day and night, life and death, growth and decline, all converging in this silent exchange. A hush falls, broken only by the hiss of dying embers and the distant cry of a hawk. The priests begin a whispered incantation in a language you scarcely recognize, Proto-Nahuatl syllables blended with local dialects. Their voices rise and fall in lilting cadences, invoking water deities, fertility spirits, and shadow guardians. You murmur along, not out of understanding but of devotion, letting the rhythms guide your breath. Below, on the plaza's lower level, dozens of worshippers spread offerings at a ring of small altars. Ceramic vessels painted with wave motifs, miniature clay toads symbolizing water's fertility, and bundles of rabbit fur dyed deep red, perhaps representing blood offerings without the gore. You recognize a curious item: packages of ground cinnabar, a mercury or too toxic for daily use but prized for its vivid red pigment. Its incorporation here hints at a willingness to flirt with danger in pursuit of ritual power. Historians are still debating this question. Were these offerings meant to feed the gods, or to symbolize human sacrifice without actual violence? Teotihuacan left almost no traces of human remains in its central rituals, unlike later Aztec practices. Some argue that dismembered figurines substituted for flesh, while others posit that secret burials occurred in undiscovered tunnels. You feel the tension of that unresolved mystery as you trace the faint grooves of offering pits beneath your sandals. Night deepens. The moon, a glowing silver arc, climbs above the summit, illuminating the city below with an ethereal glow. You lean on the altar, gazing at the sea of buildings fading to shadow, lit only by scattered torches. The contrast of the moon's cold light and the warm orange flicker creates a haunting chiaroscuro, an interplay of illumination and obscurity that seems to speak of hidden truths. An apprentice priest passes out ceramic whistles shaped like owls, creatures of the night and messengers to lunar deities. You take one, blow gently, and a plaintive hoot echoes across the tiers. The sound seems to wake something within the stone, as though the pyramid itself responds to its animal call. This performance art, blending music and architecture, strikes you as an early form of immersive theater. Behind you, dancers drape themselves in jaguar pelts and feathered capes, bodies painted in white stripes that catch the moonlight. Their movements mimic lunar phases, crouching low for new moon, raising arms for full bloom. Each gesture feels rehearsed yet spontaneous, ritualized yet joyous. As they spin, the capes flare and snap, sending small feathers drifting like petals in a breeze. You join their final circle dance, moving in step with the drummers. Each rotation brings you closer to the altar, closer to the moon's radiance. You realize that this ceremony is not solely for divination or celestial tracking. It's communal ecstasy, an affirmation that you are part of a universe alive with cycles. When the dance ends, the priests chant a final benediction, sprinkling maize flour in a spiral pattern around the summit's edge. They invite you to taste the flour, a sweet reminder of life's staples and the earth's bounty. You let it dissolve on your tongue, its gritty texture grounding you even as your mind roams the lunar plains. As the crowd begins to disperse, you linger on the summit, savoring the silence now that drums and rattles have fallen mute. The moon hangs. You step onto the broad causeway known as the Avenue of the Dead, the city's central spine stretching almost 2.5 kilometers between the Pyramid of the Moon to the north and the tracts of suburbia to the south. Around you, the early morning light glows softly against plastered walls, and a faint breeze stirs the fine limestone dust underfoot. As you take your first strides, you realize this isn't a mere street. It's the artery of a metropolis, pulsing with the footsteps of generations. Every step you take echoes on levels of packed earth, worn smooth by countless sandals, bare feet, and the occasional shishi dog scampering past. You glance left to see the soaring bulk of the Pyramid of the Sun dominating the horizon, a silent guardian watching over the avenue's west flank. To your right, compound after compound rises in uniform rows, their whitewashed walls punctuated by doorways that burrow into courtyards. Mainstream scholarship estimates that at its height, some 100,000 residents lived in these compounds, all of them connected by this grand boulevard. You feel dwarfed by the scale. This thoroughfare is nearly 40 meters wide enough for ritual processions, wheeled carts full of traded goods, and armies of worshippers. As you walk, you notice narrow trenches running alongside the paved surface, their channels still tracing ancient watercourses. Ingenious engineers diverted rainwater through these gutters into underground cisterns, preventing washouts during the rainy season. One obscure study even suggests that some channels were lined with reed mats bound by lime plaster to filter silt. Such small details, hidden beneath your sandals, hint at Teotihuacan's mastery of urban hydrology, a skill that historians are still debating as either homegrown innovation or borrowed from Gulf Coast settlements. Between the trenches, you see faint depressions where wooden stalls once stood. Today, they hold baskets of obsidian flakes, clay vessels, and bundles of dried chilies. Vendors hawk these items to passersby who pause in the shade of portable awnings made from cotton cloth. You linger at one stall to examine a small figurine carved from greenstone, its features worn smooth by the hands of travelers offering prayers. The vendor winks, best price for guest of the sun god. You smile, realizing that commerce here blends seamlessly with religion and everyday life. A gust of wind stirs the coarse dust into swirling patterns, revealing faint footprints preserved in hardened stucco patches. They're tiny, perhaps from children racing home before a downpour. You crouch to trace one with your fingertip, imagining the laughter that accompanied it. Such footprints are rare survivals, spotted only in a handful of residential compounds. Obscure as they are, they remind archaeologists that Teotihuacan was not only a city of gods, but a place where children played tag and pets chased lizards beneath monumental shadows. As the sun climbs, the avenue's plastered walls glow with occasional painted murals peeking through plaster repairs. One fragment depicts a procession of robed figures carrying trays of offerings. Perhaps maize, perhaps small clay pomegranates symbolizing fertility. You pause to study the brushstrokes. Crimson lines over a pale yellow field. It's an early example of feather painting, where artists mix ground cochineal with plant gums to produce vibrant reds. That obscure pigment recipe confounds chemists today, a testament to Teotihuacan's artistic sophistication. Midway down the avenue, you come upon the Ciudadela, a vast enclosure covering more than 100 hectares, its walls rising like a fortress, though they never functioned defensively. Inside, the great temple of the feathered serpent thrusts upward, its taled tablero tiers carved with coiled serpent heads and war-wearied warriors clutching macuahuitl. To pass beneath those stone beasts sends a thrill through you. Their tongue-like stone coils seem poised to strike, a reminder that civic power and religious awe marched side by side on this avenue. You join a small ritual on the Ciudadela's plaza. Priests stand on low platforms chanting in deep registers, their feathered headdresses bobbing in the haze of copal smoke. Behind them, dancers in jaguar skins swirl to the beat of hollow drums. Onlookers toss maize kernels into the air, letting them fall like rain as prayers for fertility. You catch one handful of kernels yourself, letting them slip through your fingers. Mainstream scholars link this practice to agricultural rights, a way to petition Tlaloc for rains. Yet some propose it echoes older maize veneration rituals from Oaxaca, an origin still under debate. Leaving the Ciudadela, you continue southward, where the avenue narrows slightly and the compounds give way to informal dwellings. Here, artisans mix plaster on small hearths, preparing to resurface the street ahead of an upcoming ceremony. You kneel beside them, stirring lime, sand, and an unusual binder, ground-up slivers of mica that catch the sun when laid thin. Obscure as it sounds, mica crumbs in plaster have only been documented in a single trench excavation, suggesting a momentary fad rather than a citywide practice. Further on, you encounter the bustling food quarter. Smoky awnings billow from dozens of cooking fires where women stir giant pots of pozole and roast cactus paddles. The aroma of chilies and toasted maize drifts across the avenue, mingling with the scent of fresh tortillas slapped on hot stones. Street vendors offer cold water drawn from deep wells, poured into gourd cups. It's a reminder that Teotihuacan's infrastructure extended beyond monumental structures into everyday comforts that sustained a vast population. You step into a side alley branching from the avenue and discover a cluster of small shrines embedded in compound walls. Each shrine shelters a miniature altar set with offerings, colorfully painted skull effigies, bundles of lotus leaves, and tiny ceramic dogs representing companion spirits. Historians are still debating this question. Were these mini-shrines private devotional niches, or did they serve as communal waypoints in nightly processions? The evidence is ambiguous, but their presence underscores how the avenue blended public spectacle with intimate piety. Rejoining the main route, you glance up to see scaffolding gripped to a compound wall several stories high. Plasterers work with long-handled brushes, applying fresh stucco. They pause to wipe sweat, then toss out a handful of sunflower seeds, an energy snack that you quickly adopt. Sunflowers were introduced here later by comparison, but a handful of carbonized seeds found near the avenue suggest they arrived earlier than once thought. Obscure digs have produced these seeds, and scholars are still debating whether they signify trade with northern cultures or local domestication. The pavement here is irregular, made of limestone slabs that vary in thickness. You step with care, noticing how some stones bear carved grooves. perhaps scraping marks left by ritual processions dragging wooden altars. One theory, still under academic scrutiny, suggests that processional floats called Teotihuacan were wheeled on logs, leaving shallow tracks that guided subsequent parades. Whether these grooves are functional or symbolic remains a hot topic among archaeologists. Beyond the food quarter, you reach a stretch lined with workshops. Obsidian knappers chip away at volcanic glass, shaping razor-sharp blades that will be traded for jade and cocoa. Potters spin rudimentary wheels beneath thatch roofs, pressing clay into standard forms that echo hundreds of compounds across the city. You slip inside one workshop, where a master craftsman presses a carved stamp onto a damp pot, leaving behind a swirling maize motif. That potter's emblem appears in sites as distant as the Maya lowlands, hinting at Teotihuacan's far-reaching influence. Returning to the avenue, you find a semicircular bench carved into a compound's facade. You sit and watch as a flock of scarlet macaws screeches overhead, their plumage ablaze against pale walls. Traders keep macaws here as exotic symbols of status. Their cages hang along the avenue, feathers clipped to prevent escape. Obscure notes in a forgotten codex describe how macaw feathers infused ritual cloaks with symbolic fire. You wonder if passing priests plucked a feather now and then to adorn headdresses on the pyramid tops. Mid-afternoon shadows begin to lengthen, and the avenue's surface cools beneath your feet. You notice a group of children chasing a small rubber ball, laughing as it bounces unpredictably off stone slabs. Ball games will one day become formalized in dedicated courts, but here you witness their impromptu origins. The rubber, harvested from Castilla elastica vines, squeaks on impact. You stoop to pick up the ball, feeling its springiness under your palm. An obscure reminder that Teotihuacan was part of a broader Mesoamerican rubber economy. As you walk on, you pass clusters of offering pits, shallow depressions filled with broken pottery, marine shells, and greenstone beads poured ceremonially into the avenue. Scholars have excavated a handful and found that offerings accumulate most densely near temple entrances, suggesting a ritual emphasis on threshold crossings. Historians are still debating whether these pits were emptied and refilled on lunar cycles or left sealed for posterity. Near the avenue's southern end, you enter a quieter zone where compounds give. You step into a narrow, sloping corridor beneath one of the grand residential compounds, where a shaft of light from a cracked plaster ceiling cuts through the dimness like a spotlight. The stone walls on either side stretch down into shadow, and you tread softly, half expecting the walls themselves to whisper secrets. This is one of Teotihuacan's hidden galleries, an underground chamber where murals, sculptures, and glyphs converge in a tapestry of art that archaeologists today still puzzle over. You can almost feel the dampness clinging to your tunic, and your sandals echo on cool stone. With every careful step, you sense that you are entering the city's most private theater of devotion and display. Your eyes adjust, and you see the first mural. A towering figure draped in flowing robes, its arms outstretched to hold a massive shell adorned with swirling water patterns. This is Tlaloc, the rain god, a mainstream icon in Teotihuacan's pantheon, whose image appears on countless temple facades and pottery. Here, though, the painter's hand goes beyond mere ritual function. The mural combines deep cerulean blues, derived from crushed azurite, with ochre highlights, creating an almost three-dimensional effect. You lean closer, tracing the water droplets that spill from the shell like painted diamonds. Historians agree that Tlaloc worship was central to Teotihuacan's water management society, but the precise role of these subterranean representations in everyday life remains a matter of debate. As you follow the corridor further, the walls widen into a broad chamber, and you find yourself surrounded by a kaleidoscope of pigments. Brilliant reds, bright yellows, lush greens, all applied in overlapping layers reveal the techniques of ancient master painters. One section shows rows of stylized maize stalks, each ear tipped with ruby-red kernels. You realize that maize was more than a staple. It was a visual motif that bound agricultural cycles to spiritual renewal. Nearby, you spy a tiny painted glyph resembling a maize cob, perhaps an early annotation marking planting season. Some scholars interpret these glyphs as a proto-calendar, while others see them simply as decorative flourishes. To your right, A long frieze depicts a procession of feathered serpents winding through swirling clouds. Their bodies undulate with perfect symmetry, and each scale is outlined in black lacquer before filled with alternating turquoise and cream hues. The serpents' heads flare into fanged maws that appear to devour the very air around them. This dancing serpent motif, one of the most iconic in Teotihuacan art, symbolizes both fertility and celestial power. Obscure as it may seem, one pigment in this frieze contains an unusual mineral called palygorskite, which gives the turquoise an almost metallic sheen. Modern chemical analysis still struggles to pinpoint its exact source. You circle the room, pausing at a detail that catches your eye. A diminutive painting of a rabbit, its body curled in mid-hop, eyes wide with what looks like startled surprise. It sits next to a large toad, perhaps symbolizing the interplay between land and water. These small, almost whimsical images remind you that Teotihuacanos didn't only paint deities and cosmic symbols. They also commemorated everyday life and local wildlife. You find yourself smiling at the rabbit's surprised expression, imagining a playful artist sneaking humor into a sacred space. In one recessed niche, a mosaic of tiny stone tesserae forms a complex pattern of interlocking diamonds. The stones, jade, greenstone, and polished basalt, are cut so precisely that you can't see mortar between them. This intricate mural may have once gleamed candlelit in ceremonial gatherings. Obscure references in colonial-era chronicles hint that such stone mosaics were considered more valuable than gold, yet only a handful of these mosaics survive. Each one is now a national treasure, yet their original context, whether in temples, elite homes, or public venues, remains contested. A sudden draft rustles behind you, and you realize you're standing before a carved limestone block nearly as tall as you are. It's one of several sculpted stelae embedded in the chamber walls, each bearing relief scenes of ritual sacrifice and cosmic alignment. On this block, you see a priest lifting a bowl of blood-red pigment toward a triple-tiered step pyramid. Below him kneels a supplicant offering a bundle of feathers. You crouch to inspect the relief, counting the feather bundles, 8 in total, a number associated with Venus's cycles. Historians are still debating whether Teotihuacan's priests incorporated Venus worship into their rituals, or if the number 8 recalls an earlier Mesoamerican calendrical tradition. Beside the stela, a series of life-size stone masks peer out from shallow niches. Each mask, carved from single blocks of andesite, shows a different expression. Solemn contemplation, fierce vigilance, serene joy. Some wear goggle-like eye masks reminiscent of the rain god's iconography, while others bear simple human features. These masks likely served as stage props in enacting mythic dramas, affixed to performers' faces for the duration of a ceremony. You touch one mask's cheek, running your finger over the stone's patina. The cool surface betrays no hint of the actor's voice that once emanated from behind this expression. Further along, you discover a low platform supporting small sculpted figurines arranged in rows. They're no more than a foot tall, made of unglazed terracotta and painted in muted earth tones. Figures of warriors clutch wooden staffs, women hold infants, and musicians brandish rattles and drums. You count dozens, perhaps hundreds, each one subtly different. These figurines were buried in caches beneath residential compounds, supposedly to populate the spiritual underworld. One obscure find included figurines with tiny holes drilled into their heads, possibly for threading ritual dyes or animal hairs as headdresses. The purpose of these decorations remains unknown. Above the figurines, on a ledge painted deep crimson, you spot a thin carved band of glyphic symbols. They're arranged in neat columns, each glyph within a square cartouche reminiscent of later Maya writing. You kneel to examine. One symbol looks like a stylized eye, another a conch shell, a third a stepped block. This sequence has been tentatively read as place names or clan identifiers, yet no one has agreed on a complete translation. Some epigraphers argue that Teotihuacan developed its own writing system parallel to the Maya, while others dismiss the glyphs as mere iconography without phonetic value. Historians are still debating this question. You continue past a larger-than-life relief of a bird-headed figure striding across a ridge of waves. The carving is so deep that your hand slips into the shadowed crevice beneath its wing. This figure, dubbed the Air Lord by early explorers, has been linked to wind deities in later Mesoamerican cultures. But its original meaning here is speculative. Obscure shipment records from colonial Mexico mention codices filled with winged men, yet no native text describes them by name. You wonder if hidden glyphs once accompanied these carvings, now erased by time and plaster over paint. In one corner of the chamber, a fallen column lies broken, its capital carved with swirling scrolls and clawed talons. Archaeologists believe it once marked a boundary between ceremonial zones. Near its base, a tiny graffiti-like inscription scratched into the stone reads, "For 42." Perhaps a maintenance code or construction tally. This mundane scribble, left by a builder's chisel, reveals the human side of an otherwise divine space. You trace the numbers with your fingertip, imagining busy workers marking progress before the plaster sealed their secret forever. Beyond the column, the chamber opens into a side alcove where fragments of painted pottery lie scattered. Shards of bowls and jars depict deities, day signs, and animal scenes. One shows a mythic jaguar-crocodile hybrid prowling among reeds. You gently lift a shard in your gloved hand, marveling at the fine-line work. Obscure pigment analysis of similar shards found in a distant Zapotec site suggests trade or shared artisans. Yet the chronology remains tangled. Historians are still debating this question. Did Teotihuacan artisans travel south, or were Zapotec painters summoned north? At the far end of the chamber, a low stone bench offers a place to rest. You settle down and gaze upward at the vaulted ceiling, where a mural of concentric rings spirals toward a central sunburst. Each ring is dotted with small glyphs, stars, rain symbols, and eye-like orbs. This cosmic map may represent a mythic journey of the sun through the night sky, guiding souls in the underworld. Yet some scholars argue it's simply decorative geometry without narrative intent. The debate over its meaning echoes the greater mystery of Teotihuacan's spiritual world. You rise and retrace your steps toward the entrance, pausing to shine your torch on a hidden panel recessed behind a fallen lintel. Here, a handful of faint glyphs, just 3 strokes and a dot, are barely visible. This is perhaps the earliest example of written notation at Teotihuacan, preceding the better-known wall glyphs by decades. Yet without a Rosetta Stone, you step off the Avenue of the Dead into a wide plaza where the air still shimmers with the memory of incense and drumbeats. All around you, stone benches hug the base of low platforms that once hosted altars, statues, and processional icons. As you pause to run your fingers along a carved serpent coil, you realize you're entering the living theater of Teotihuacan's gods, myths, and religious beliefs. Here, stone and paint converge to tell stories of creation, cosmic order, and the ceaseless cycle of life and death, even if death is rarely as bloody here as in later Aztec lore. Tonight, you'll walk among deities, join whispered chants, and maybe even rub elbows with a few phantom priests handing out maize-flavored totems. You begin by approaching a tall sculpture of the feathered serpent, later known to the Nahua as Quetzalcoatl but already revered here as a sky spirit with cracked obsidian eyes. Mainstream scholarship tells us that this serpentine figure symbolizes both the regenerative power of rain and the sweeping winds of the celestial realm, uniting earth and sky in one sinuous form. You trace the carved feathers along the serpent's flanks, noticing how each plume is individually flaked from greenstone and inset into limestone, creating an iridescent shimmer that must have dazzled worshippers in torchlight. As you circle the sculpture, you hear the low hum of a nearby shrine where water drips into a shallow basin. This shrine honors Tlaloc, the rain god, whose goggle-shaped eyes stare out from a painted mask plastered above the fountain. Streams of water once dripped rhythmically onto mica flakes scattered in the basin, sending tiny gleams dancing across stone walls. An obscure fact: some archaeologists discovered snail shell fragments mixed with the mica, suggesting that shell-rattling ceremonies accompanied the drip-drip-drip of water, an auditory trick to mimic the onset of rain. You lean close and catch the cool moisture on your cheek, half expecting droplets of blessing. Moving deeper into the plaza, you pass under a carved lintel where twin masks of the storm god gaze down at you. This deity, usually depicted with fangs and voluminous wind motifs, commands thunder and lightning. Historians are still debating this question. Did Teotihuacan priests actually stage lightning rod rituals to harness electrical power? Or was the storm god merely a metaphor for seasonal storms? Either way, you pause to touch the carved bolt motif and feel the energy of a tempest suspended in stone. Ahead, you see the great goddess, a name given by modern archaeologists to a recurring female figure draped in flowing robes and adorned with butterfly wing headdresses. Mainstream consensus holds that she represents fertility, Earth's bounty, and the chthonic forces that bring maize from seed to stalk. Painted in lush reds, greens, and ochres, her image spans entire apartments and shrines. You run a finger along one of her painted vines and marvel at how multiple layers of stucco preserve centuries of brushstrokes. Next to the great goddess's fresco, a pair of small glyphs catch your eye. One shaped like a maize cob, the other like a small stone axe. These icon signs are thought to annotate agricultural season and ritual implement, marking when and how worshippers should invoke her favor. Yet some epigraphers argue that these glyphs belong to a proto-writing system unique to Teotihuacan, an emerging script that never fully developed into the phonetic systems of the Maya. Historians are still debating this question. You step onto a narrow ramp that leads to a low platform where a shaman stands weaving palm fronds into a headdress. He looks up and smiles, beckoning you forward. As you approach, he fastens the fronds into place, murmuring incantations in a dialect that mixes Proto-Nahuatl with older local tongues. You feel the headdress settle on your head like a living nest of green light. It's an intimate reminder that worship here was hands-on, participatory, and often joyful, not solemn or forbidding. The shaman points you toward a circular dial painted on the platform's floor, a wheel of day sign glyphs that align with Teotihuacan's ritual calendar. Each glyph, a jaguar paw, a screaming face, a mountain marks one of 20 days in a month, and the wheel's concentric rings represent the 9-month agricultural year. Mainstream studies link this calendar to the later Aztec Xiapawali, noting continuity across centuries. You step onto the wheel, feeling the painted symbols beneath your sandals, and imagine how priests used it to choose auspicious days for planting, feasting, and ceremonies. Beside the painted wheel, a small altar holds a scatter of offerings: jade beads, obsidian flakes, shell beads, and handfuls of red ochre. You kneel and place a single maize kernel on the altar, whispering a personal plea for protection. The shaman nods approvingly and sprinkles a pinch of ground cochineal over your fingers, an obscure custom meant to mark you as a devotee. Historians are still debating this question. Was cochineal pigment used here primarily for cosmetic, ritual, or medicinal purposes? The answer remains elusive. The plaza's center hosts a towering singular pillar, the so-called obsidian altar, where priests once carved messages into the stone's cracked surface. You trace a faint inscription: a small bird, a mountain peak, and the number 7. One reading interprets this as a reference to Venus's heliacal rising in the 7th month, signaling a renewal of time cycles. Others see it as a tribute to a city-founding myth involving 7 original clans. Historians are still debating this question, and without a Rosetta Stone, each interpretation relies on fragments and guesswork. While walking past rows of benches, you pause to examine a series of carved sculptures. Small basalt figurines of kneeling supplicants, each clutching a bowl of maize. Their features are so finely carved that you can see individual fingers and teeth. An obscure discovery in a recent dig revealed similar figurines with traces of cinnabar on their cheeks. Tiny ritual blush marks that might have signified a state of ritual purity. You rub your thumb against one figurine's shoulder, wondering whether you feel the minute rub of ochre that ancestors applied in ceremony. Continuing east, you cross a narrow causeway lined with miniature shrines, each marking a directional point in the city's sacred geometry. At the Cardinal North Shrine, you find a painted fresco of a black bird perched on a crescent moon, a symbol of night watch and protection. At the East Shrine, a sunburst glyph shows rays extending over stepped pyramids. You reflect on how Teotihuacan's religious landscape fused architecture and myth, embedding deities into every corner of urban space. Your next stop is a small pool in the shade of a compound wall, where clear spring water trickles over stones arranged in concentric rings. This reflection pool was used for divinatory rituals. Priests gazed into the water surface to read omens and communicate with underworld deities. Obscure as it sounds, traces of dream-inducing morning glory seeds were found in nearby sediments, suggesting that vision quests accompanied these aquatic oracles. You lean over and catch a faint starry reflection, an apt moment to remember that Teotihuacan's rituals often blurred the lines between waking reality and symbolic dreamscapes. Further on, you enter a wide hall where a row of massive stone masks stand sentinel. These are portraits of deities: the water god, the shell mother, the seed bearer, each distinguished by headgear and facial ornamentation. Their hollow eyes stare into yours, daring you to decipher their silent stories. An obscure report from early 20th century explorers mentions that locals believed these masks housed guardian spirits, so potent that touching one without permission could invite misfortune. You nod respectfully and back away, minding the ancient protocol. You climb a gentle slope to the eastern edge of the site, where an isolated platform hosts a shrine to the moon goddess. In fading light, her painted figure glows pale blue, her arms raised in a crescent embrace. Mainstream lore holds that she governed tides, menstrual cycles, and the softer rhythms of life. You stand under her painted form and feel the hush of dusk descend, as if she draws the sun's warmth and holds it in her palms. As night envelopes the city, torchbearers light braziers along the plaza's periphery. Shadows dance across the painted walls, animating the frozen myths. You hear distant chanting, the crescendo of a nocturnal ceremony celebrating the marriage of sun and moon, a symbolic union that ensures agricultural fertility. You follow the sound to a ring of dancers clad in white cotton tunics, their faces hidden behind jaguar tooth masks. They move in slow circles, hands extended toward an unseen center. You step into the ring, swept into their orbit, and join the cyclical invocation. Sun, return to earth. Moon, guide the dark. As the dance ends, you find yourself back at the feathered serpent sculpture where you began, now bathed in moonlight. The city feels alive, its stones humming with memory and possibility. You realize that Teotihuacan's religion was not a static pantheon but a living network, gods, myths, and rituals weaving together diverse beliefs from communities across Mesoamerica. Before you step off the Avenue of the Dead and follow a narrow side street flanked by low stone benches and plastered walls painted with faded glyphs advertising wares. The morning bustle reaches you like a warm breeze. Children darting between vendors, llamas or tiny shishis wagging ropes as they carry clay jars, and traders chanting prices in a mix of local dialects. Here, in the heart of Teotihuacan, commerce and daily life blend seamlessly. This is the marketplace, the city's beating economic heart. As you weave through stalls, you'll trace the flow of obsidian blades, cacao beans, and colorful feathers that traveled hundreds of kilometers along trade routes, shaping Teotihuacan's wealth and influence. Your first stop is a broad open plaza near the Ciudadela's southern gate, where dozens of vendors spread woven mats on the ground. Mainstream scholarship tells us this plaza functioned as the central marketplace, where merchants from across Mesoamerica converged at dawn to sell local specialties and far-flung luxuries. You catch a whiff of roasted cocoa and approach a stall where women sort dried cacao beans into clay bowls. The rich, earthy scent reminds you that chocolate wasn't a sweet drink reserved for Aztec nobles, but a prized commodity, even here in the 3rd century CE. Next to the cacao merchants, you find a cluster of artisans selling obsidian blades, prized tools and symbols of prestige. You pick up a blade and feel how its edges gleam like broken glass. Obsidian from the Pachuca source, located about 70 kilometers north, was transported by porters and pack animals along mountain trails, eventually reaching Teotihuacan's workshops. Mainstream estimates place the city's obsidian trade network at over 1,000 kilometers, connecting the valley to distant highlands and coastal regions. Each blade you handle testifies to a complex supply chain. Quarrymen, traders, knappers, and merchants all collaborated in a finely tuned economic web. As you move on, you notice small seals made of painted clay shards tied to bundles of textiles. These tokens, now preserved in fragmentary form, are interpreted by scholars as early accounting devices, marking quantities or origins. One obscure study found traces of bitumen on a seal fragment, suggesting it was affixed with natural resin to prevent tampering. This tiny clue has fueled debates about whether Teotihuacan had a state-controlled trade monopoly or a freer merchant class. Historians are still debating this question. You skirt around a group of vendors displaying shell necklaces carved from spondylus shells imported from the Gulf Coast. Their iridescent surfaces glow like pearls in the filtered sunlight. The traders explain that these shells are considered sacred, tied to water deities and fertility rites. You slip a strand over your neck and feel its weight, both literal and symbolic. It reminds you that Teotihuacan's economy wasn't purely material but interwoven with religious exchange. A sudden shout draws your attention to a woman balancing a large tray of rubber balls on her head. Children chase after the balls, eager to buy one for an impromptu game. You join them, tossing a ball into the air and catching it with a grin. Rubber, harvested from Castilla elastica trees hundreds of kilometers south, traveled here via coastal canoes and river networks. The arrival of rubber highlights Teotihuacan's role as a crossroads, linking the Gulf Coast's rubber economy to central highland markets. Behind the rubber stand, you spot a group of merchants haggling over jaguar skins. Tanned pelts dyed with cochineal to strip away the natural spots, then repainted with imitation patterns. Jaguars weren't native to the valley, so these skins came from the tropical lowlands. Their high price reflects both the danger of procurement and the status they conferred. You watch as two traders flick over a jaguar paw, inspecting claws for authenticity. One scholar suggests that jaguar pelts were reserved for elite warriors or priestly garments, yet functional evidence remains scant. Historians are still debating this question. Were these pelts purely symbolic, or did they serve as functional hunting cloaks? You wander toward a row of stands selling greenstone beads and necklaces carved from local serpentine. A master lapidary sits cross-legged, chipping away at a small boulder with a deer antler baton. Obscure as it sounds, recent microanalysis found that some beads were drilled with copper tools, an unexpected discovery since Teotihuacan is not known to have smelted copper. This anomaly suggests either trade with early metallurgy centers or experimental metalworking within the city itself. You ask the lapidary about the copper drill, but he just shrugs before returning to his silent work. Beyond the gemstone merchants, you find a communal grain market. Large baskets brimming with maize, beans, and squash line the plaza's edge. Farmers from nearby terraces arrive by donkey or on foot, trading their surplus crops for obsidian blades or woven cloth. You take a handful of moist blue corn kernels, destined for tortillas later, and taste their earthy sweetness. This Three Sisters produce undergirds the city's diet and economy, and the yearly tribute of grain likely funded state-sponsored ceremonies. Historians are still debating this question. Was grain distribution centrally managed as a form of early welfare, or left to local kinship networks? The evidence teeters between both scenarios. Moving along, you stumble upon a stall selling coarse woven textiles dyed in reds and yellows. The dyers use cochineal insects ground into paste, mixed with local plant mordants. Patterns of chevrons and zigzags mark different workshops, serving as artisan signatures. Obscure excavations found small tags tied to cloth bundles, marked with glyphs denoting yardage, suggesting an early system of standardized measurements. Without official measures like cubits or fathoms, traders likely relied on body-based units or these clay tags to prevent disputes. A low, shaded archway leads you into an enclosed compound where traders meet to negotiate bulk deals away from the public eye. Inside, you see large ceramic vessels, alas, filled with ground cinnabar used in ritual painting. A wealthy merchant counts out a pile of greenstone beads on a flat stone table, eyeing your curious gaze. He explains that cinnabar pays for temple imports, while jade beads secure alliances with distant elites. This intersection of religion, politics, and economy underscores Teotihuacan's sophistication. Trade was never just trade but the currency of power. At the compound's far end, a platform overlooks a stream of porters carrying baskets of anthill soil, used as a fine pigment or even as cattle fodder centuries later. These collector laborers scaled steep hillsides at dawn to harvest the soil's iron-rich hues. Obscure experimentation with these soils has shown they can produce reds brighter than ochre, though their toxicity to humans remains uncertain. This curious obsession with soil pigments reveals how Teotihuacan's artistry and economy drew on every available resource. You emerge from the traders' enclave onto a busy roadway leading south toward a canal-fed irrigation system. Overhead, whitewashed markers indicate distances in sunsteps, a unit based on an average paces per day measurement. While not precise in modern terms, these markers helped merchants coordinate caravan schedules along trade routes. Historians are still debating this question. Were these markers state-installed milestones, or informal guides set by merchant guilds? The truth remains buried beneath centuries of dust. Following the arrow-like marker, you wind through gentle hills and terraced fields, eventually reaching a crossroads where mountain trails converge. Here, you find a small outpost, Teotihuacan's frontier trading post, manned by a handful of scouts who collect tribute in the form of salt slabs and hand-woven mats. Beyond, a steep path climbs toward volcanic highlands where miners extract cinnabar and mica. You pass carved stone boundary markers etched with clan glyphs, indicating that multiple kin groups shared control over resource zones. This decentralized arrangement suggests a blend of state and private enterprise in resource management. Back in the city, you visit the municipal storehouses. Long, low buildings where large jars of traded goods, cacao, shell beads, and obsidian cores sit ready for ritual redistribution. Workers tally stock using small clay tokens shaped like maize cobs or turtle shells. Some tokens are stamped with the seal of the city's administrators, indicating official counts. Obscure vaults discovered beneath these storehouses held exotic imports, species of stingless bee honey from the Yucatan, fragrant oils from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, revealing Teotihuacan's appetite for rare delicacies. You wander to the southern edge of the city where another market emerges by a freshwater spring. Traders here specialize in poultry, dogs, and small livestock. You watch as a farmer negotiates a price for a young turkey, its feathers glinting in the sun. Poultry breeding may have started locally but expanded through trade with southern peoples. A peculiar note, carbon isotope analysis of bones found in palace refuse suggests that turkeys were fed maize scraps, making them early corn-fed birds, a novelty later borrowed by European breeders. As the afternoon sun wanes, you return to the central marketplace. The plaza. You step off the bustling side street and into a quiet courtyard nestled between two gleaming whitewashed compounds. A cluster of bougainvillea spills over a low wall, its magenta blooms carpeting the ground like confetti from some long-forgotten festival. This courtyard belongs to a middling household, neither elite palace nor humble hut, but right here, in the hinge between status tiers, you'll glimpse the rhythms of daily life that bind Teotihuacan together. Tonight, you explore society, class, and the small rituals that mark each person's place in this ancient world. At the courtyard's far edge, a stout matriarch sits on a stone bench, grinding maize on a well-worn metate. The rhythmic scrape of the grinding stone echoes like a heart's pulse through the hushed morning air. Mainstream scholarship tells us that compounds like this housed extended families of up to 50 people, often spanning 3 generations under one roof. You notice a neat stack of clay cooking vessels at her feet, reserved for everyday meals, and a single painted bowl set aside for guests, signaling her household's moderate standing. A young boy darts into the courtyard, clutching a small wooden idol of the feathered serpent. He pauses to bow before it, lips moving in a silent chant you can't quite catch. His ceremonial practice underscores how religion permeated every social rung, from palace elites invoking cosmic powers to children making private prayers. Historians are still debating this question. Were children formally initiated into cults at a fixed age, or did families pass down devotional roles informally through household tradition? You lean closer, tasting the uncertainty in the air like an unfinished incantation. Moving toward a low platform shaded by a woven awning, you find a pair of craftsmen carving obsidian blades. Their leather tunics bear faint smudges of red pigment, perhaps accidental splashes of ochre from earlier painting tasks. Obsidian flaking was a skilled occupation, and these artisans formed a distinct class, the maquillas. They earned clay tokens stamped with clan glyphs for each blade they produced, a primitive but effective ledger system. An obscure detail. Some tokens bear microscopic drill holes filled with gold dust, a flourish that suggests early experimentation with precious metal inlay, even though large-scale metallurgy wouldn't appear here for another half-millennium. Nearby, a group of women works a communal loom, weaving cotton and yucca fibers into broad bands of cloth. You run your fingers along the textile and feel the tight, even weave, proof of sophisticated fiber processing techniques. Dye pots of plant-based reds and yellows bubble beside them. One dyer lifts a fistful of cochineal paste and mashes it with a stone pestle, releasing clouds of carminic tint that stain her fingertips. She laughs at your surprised look. Stains come off with lime wash, or on archaeologists centuries later. That offhand joke masks attention. Historians are still debating this question. Was textile production controlled by matrilineal guilds, or organized centrally by civic administrators? The answer shifts with each new excavation. As midday sun pours across the courtyard, you observe a trio of servants gathering firewood. Their tunics are plain, and their hair bound simply with strips of bark. They carry bundles of mesquite and pine on their backs, shadows trailing behind them like apprentice spirits. These laborers constitute a lower tier, free citizens whose tribute to the city might include days of corvée labor on public works. Some researchers propose that Teotihuacan employed a rotational labor tax. Each household provided workers in turn, while others argue that hereditary servitude tied families to elite patrons. Historians are still debating this question, and you sense the ambiguity in the servants' measured footsteps. Over near the cooking hearth, a mother tends 3 clay pots. One of stewed beans, one of squash and chili, and a smaller one simmering pulque. The slight fizz of fermented agave rises in fragrant spirals, enticing a curious courtyard cat. You scratch the feline behind the ear. Its coat bears white stripes painted on with ochre, a protective ritual coloring to ward off misfortune. An obscure snippet from a colonial codex mentions ritual cat coloring as a means to confuse evil spirits, though it's rarely corroborated archaeologically. You scratch your own chin, wondering if the cat's owners follow this practice or if it's a clever marketing ploy to fetch them better beer supply deals. In the shade of a plastered wall, shrouded niches house household gods. Tiny stone figurines of the great goddess, Tlaloc, and a coiled feathered serpent. The family's little shrine glows with offerings of maize sprigs and a scattering of ground cinnabar. You kneel and add a single kernel of chocolate bean, hoping the additive is welcome. Mainstream studies record that cacao held both economic and ritual importance, used in ceremonies from marriage rites to death observances. Yet in daily life, one quiet question remains. Did owners reserve cacao gifts for gods only, or did children sip diluted chocolate as treat after chores? Historians are still debating this question, and no surviving residue analysis decisively settles it. A young woman appears with a basket of feathers, turquoise, scarlet macaw, and owl, meant for weaving into ceremonial capes. She perches on a low stool and drills tiny holes in each feather's quill before threading them onto a leather strip. Her nimble fingers work with grace born of repetition. She rarely glances at the spinning bobbin of a nearby status necklace in progress. That necklace, heavy with greenstone beads and suspended on a copper wire, will eventually adorn a priest during festival processions. The presence of copper wiring here hints at long-distance metal trade or local experimentation, another obscure clue tangled in larger debates about early metallurgy in central Mexico. Nearby, outside the household compound, a group of men unroll a reed mat on the ground. They huddle over a game board etched with white clay lines. Pottery, a gambling game played citywide. Stones, beans, and marked pebbles serve as stakes. Laughter erupts when one player's tokens tumble off the mat, forcing him to forfeit a small tray of yucca chips. Pottery transcended class barriers. Nobles wagered exotic goods, while commoners staked days' wages. Yet historians are still debating this question. Was pottery a form of tax revenue for the state when played in public plazas, or purely recreational? Evidence remains elusive, caught between etched stones and oral traditions lost to time. A caravan of porters arrives at the compound's outer gate, heaving baskets of dried fish, jaguar skins, and cacao sacks. The head porter, distinguished by a red-dipped tunic, steps forward to negotiate prices. He consults a ledger kept on a thin strip of amati bark, scratching tallies with a piece of charred reed. Here you see a microcosm of Teotihuacan's hybrid economy. Tribute, barter, standardized trade, and informal lending all coexisting. Some scholars argue that tribute from subject towns underpin the city's wealth, while others insist free markets played the primary role. Historians are still debating this question in heated symposia today. As afternoon light softens, you join a family preparing for a neighborhood feast. Long benches surround a broad plaza where cooks hang giant pots from wooden tripods. The event celebrates a good harvest, a shared ritual that reinforces communal bonds across compounds. Children chase each other under tables piled with tamales and roasted squash seeds, their laughter weaving through the aroma of stewed rabbit and chili. You grab a tamale wrapped in corn husk and bite into its warm, savory center. Food is not only sustenance but social glue. Sharing a dish affirms alliances and cements obligations. After the feast, musicians appear with clay whistles, drums, and rattles. They form an impromptu band and play lively rhythms that invite everyone to dance. You find yourself swept into a circle, feet tapping on smooth stones as couples spin and leap. The social dance here serves multiple purposes: courtship ritual, communal celebration, and a means to demonstrate individual status through dance costume and skill. Obscure references in early missionary reports suggest that some dancers wore small bells attached to their ankles, an embellishment not yet documented archaeologically. Historians are still debating whether those reports reflect genuine Teotihuacan practice or later colonial embellishment. As dusk falls, torches ignite around the courtyard's perimeter. The matriarch leads an evening offering: a tray of dried gourds filled with pulque, little clay cups of salted chili, and a bundle of fresh corn husks. You kneel and sip the frothy drink, feeling its gentle warmth. Conversation drifts from next season's planting plans to rumors of unrest in distant provinces. Even in this serene household, global currents ripple through local talk. In the quiet afterward, you wander through darkened corridors where family members have posted small painted plaques marking births, marriages, and deaths. Each plaque bears a glyphic emblem: an ear of corn for a birth, joined hands for a wedding, an owl for mourning. This personalized record-keeping hints at an early form of civilization. You leave the sun-baked causeways of Teotihuacan behind and set out across a landscape that ripples from cactus-studded plains into misty highland foothills. The wind carries distant bird calls and the faint echo of your own footsteps, as if the ancient stones still hum beneath your soles. Tonight, you're tracing the silent ripple of Teotihuacan's architectural vision, its talatablero style, across Mesoamerica, watching how distant cities borrowed its bold lines and soaring forms like fashion-forward heirs to a design pedigree. By dusk you reach the edge of the Maya lowlands, where jungle vines drape over crumbling stones at Tikal. Here, in the 4th century CE, local rulers began to carve talatablero profiles into their temple facades, echoing the giant slopes and frames of Teotihuacan's pyramids. Mainstream scholarship tells us that the appearance of talatablero at Tikal's Temple II around 400 CE marks an explicit nod to Teotihuacan power, perhaps a pact or even a show of fealty after a diplomatic mission to the Valley of Mexico. You gaze up at the sloping panels and framed niches that punctuate the temple's lower tiers, marveling at how jungle light filters through the lichen stucco, softening its sharp geometry. Did you know that microscopic analysis of Tikal's stucco revealed grains of volcanic ash identical to those used at Teotihuacan? This obscure chemical fingerprint suggests that either craftsmen or raw materials traveled over 1,500 kilometers to unify building methods, a logistical feat that still boggles modern engineers. Climbing the worn steps, you run your hand along an edge where ancient plaster peels away, exposing local limestone beneath. The grooves of moss-softened talads feel alive in your palm, as if you're touching a memory. Yet historians are still debating this question. Did Tikal's adoption of talatablero represent direct Teotihuacan oversight, or was it a voluntary embrace of a prestigious aesthetic to legitimize local dynasties? The arguments hinge on fragmentary records and ambiguous carbon dates, leaving you with more questions than certainties. Pressing onward, you trek over ridges toward the Guatemalan highlands, where the preclassic site of Caminaljuyu once thrived. Here, at an elevation above the mist, you find vestiges of Talatablero plastered onto a massive platform called the Culebro site. Unlike its Maya cousin, Caminaljuyu's variant mixes local volcanic tuff with ground seashells in its stucco mix, a curious local twist. Obscure field notes mention only 2 samples of shell lime plaster ever found, making it a rare exception in Teotihuacan-style edifices. You crouch to examine one patch, noting faint shell flecks that glint under your torchlight. You step back to take in the full facade. The slope of the talud rises almost at the same angle as your forehead when you look skyward, and the tablero sits proudly above, framed by crisp edges. Here, too, historians are still debating this question. Did this highland city import master builders from central Mexico? Or did local masons adapt the style after seeing passing traders' itineraries? As you trace the building's silhouette against cloud-pink sky, you sense how architectural ideas could drift like seeds on the wind, taking root far from their origin. By late evening, you descend into the basin of Mexico once more, then wind south toward Cholula. At the largest pyramid by volume in the Americas, you scramble over terraces that bear faint traces of Talatablero revetments. Mainstream studies suggest that during the Classic period, builders applied Talatablero panels to Cholula's shaft-faced core, an update to an earlier, more organic construction. From your vantage on the north slope, you watch the sunset smear the pyramid's layers in amber hues, imagining torchlit ceremonies that flared those facades with orange glow. An obscure note from early excavators records finding mica inclusions in Cholula stucco, an unexpected mineral that glitters only in narrow shafts of light. The builders here mixed a pinch of mica into the plaster atop their tablero panels, perhaps to catch the rising sun. No other site in Mesoamerica shares this detail, making Cholula's tribute to Teotihuacan style uniquely glittering. Still, historians are still debating this question. Was Cholula a provincial capital under Teotihuacan's direct sway, or an independent center that traded in architectural fashions? The scant epigraphic record from Cholula yields no clear tribute statements, leaving the nature of their relationship open to interpretation. You rise before dawn and slip through fields of milpa toward the Mixtec and Zapotec highlands of Oaxaca. Monte Alban's Grand Plaza greets you with stairways that echo talud contours, though here local artisans carved decorative panels with deeply incised geometric patterns rather than broad framed niches. Mainstream archaeology posits that Monte Alban's integration of Talatablero around 600 CE represents a late wave of stylistic diffusion from central Mexico, blending with local traditions of board and lintel construction to birth new hybrid forms. In one silent courtyard, you examine a fallen lintel that once bridged 2 Talatablero panels. Its notch marks a line with a Zapotec calendar system, hinting that local scribes reinterpreted Teotihuacan's design to encode time in stone. An obscure discovery beneath this lintel revealed a cache of painted conch shell beads, likely offerings to celebrate the plaza's dedication. Their arrangement suggests a ritual linking the style's structural framing to seasonal ceremonies, but archaeologists still puzzle over which festivals corresponded to those shell deposits. Again, historians are still debating this question. Did the Zapotec elite adopt Talatablero to signal alliance with Teotihuacan? Or did they independently develop similar solutions to stabilize steep stairways against seismic tremors? As you let your gaze drift across crumbled walls, the debate feels less about politics and more about practical innovation converging across cultures. Your journey next leads west to the Gulf Coast lowlands, where the classic site of El Tajín emerges from dense brush. Here, the Talatablero derivatives take on a flamboyant twist. Slender taluds alternate with tall sculpted columns bearing reliefs of ballgame players and flint knives. Mainstream scholarship views El Tajín's use of Talatablero around 800 CE as a conscious revival of Teotihuacan motifs fused with regional lore of wind and fertility. The result is a style that feels both familiar and shockingly new. You examine a talud panel carved in bas-relief with rows of flying birds, an unusual decorative overlay never seen in Teotihuacan proper. Obscure conservation reports note traces of cacao oil in the relief lines, suggesting that artisans rubbed the wet carved surfaces with chocolate during ceremonies. No one's quite sure why, though some propose it enhanced ritual fragrance as priests circled the platform. But historians are still debating this question. Was El Tajin's eclectic architecture a deliberate manifesto of cultural reclamation, or simply a local reinterpretation of popular motifs? The city's collapse around 1200 CE left few written records, and the true intent of its builders remains encrypted in stone. Turning south again, you venture into the lowland Maya world of Copan in Honduras. There, the talud shape appears less as grand panels and more in subtle slope-framed entrances to elite complexes. Mainstream researchers suggest that Copan's royal dynasty invited Teotihuacan emissaries in the 5th century CE, commissioning small-scale talud tablero details to assert cosmopolitan status. You step through one such portal, running your hand along the angled jamb where graffiti from 19th century looters still mars the stone. An obscure tidbit: pollen samples taken from the mortar in Copan's talud panels revealed traces of exotic pine species, native only to highland valleys. Evidence that builders transported not only stones but aromatic woods to scent their construction. This practice hints at an early form of ritual air conditioning, though archaeologists debate whether it was symbolic or practical. Historians are still debating this question. Did Copan's miniature talud tablero features signify direct Teotihuacan political presence, or were they merely fashionable adornments in an age of dynamic cultural exchange? The carved glyphs that accompany some slopes read like incomplete endorsements, tantalizing in their gaps. As night falls, you retrace your steps, passing through a half-ruined plaza where no talud remains, just the indentation where one once stood. The absence speaks as loudly as presence. Architectural ideas spread not only by copying but by selective adoption and local adaptation. You realize that these slopes and panels were never mere decorations. They were ideological markers, signaling prestige, diplomacy, and shared sacred geometry. By the time you return to Teotihuacan's valley, the city's silhouettes greet you under a canopy of stars. From this vantage, the echoes of distant pyramids feel like returning whispers. You stand before the Pyramid of the Sun, its talud tiers now silent in moonlight, aware that every slope you traced across Mesoamerica leads back here in spirit. You lean against a low platform, the night wind teasing the edges of your tunic. In your mind's eye, you see a mosaic of landscapes, from rainforest temples to volcanic highland courts, united by a design language born of human hands shaping earth and stone. Though the original builders' names are lost, their architectural legacy endures, carved into every copied talud and framed niche. Sleep gathers at You return to the heart of Teotihuacan under a pale dawn sky, but something feels different, a hush that isn't the usual pre-market calm. As you step onto the Avenue of the Dead, the grand grid seems fractured, and blocks that once bustled now lie unfinished or scarred by soot. Today, you'll trace the signs of decline and abandonment that turned this bustling city into a silent ruin. You'll clamber over burnt temple steps, peer into mass tombs, and wonder whether drought, internecine strife, or foreign invaders finally broke the city's backbone. The first hint is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. You approach its once gleaming talud tablero facade and notice dark burn marks creeping up the lower tiers, like fingerprints left by angry hands. Mainstream chronology places a series of devastating fires here around 650 CE, evidenced by charcoal layers sealed beneath collapsed vaults. Archaeologists have documented charred beams and melted pigments, signs that parts of the temple were deliberately torched. You lean close to the blackened stone and trace a scorched line with your fingertip, feeling the cold residue of ancient violence or ritual closure. Walking down the slope, you peer into a collapsed tunnel entrance. Torchlight reveals toppled walls and singed glyphs carved into the lintel, now half erased by smoke. Here and there, skeletons lay in disarray, victims of a hasty internment. Radiocarbon dating confirms most died in a narrow window between 650 and 700 CE, suggesting a crisis too swift to be mere accident. Historians are still debating this question. Did civil strife erupt into open conflict, or did invading armies breach the city's sacred core? You climb up to the base of the Pyramid of the Moon, where you find another burned layer. This time, the char marks coat the plaza floor, and you pick your way over shards of obsidian blades fused to melted shell beads. The aftermath feels apocalyptic, as if worshippers fled mid-ceremony, leaving altars alight. One obscure discovery unearthed dozens of partially burned gourds intricately carved with sacrificial scenes, offering vessels that scorched rather than shattered. Why burn these precious items? Was it to seal their power, or to deny future looters their spiritual potency? As you wander toward the residential compounds, you notice walls half-plastered, abandoned mid-stroke. White stucco drips like curdled milk over terraces, telling of hurried retreats. Inside one courtyard, ceramic cooking pots sit inverted on firing stones, still warm from the last meal. A scattering of maize kernels lies baked into the ash. No time to gather provisions, no will to return. You crouch to taste a kernel's smoky sweetness, a poignant reminder that life here ended abruptly. You approach a mass tomb sealed beneath a small platform. Recent excavations revealed the remains of nearly 100 individuals buried simultaneously. The bodies are interred without grave goods, save for one obsidian blade lodged at the collarbone of each skeleton. It's a grim uniformity. Children, elders, women, men all laid to rest in silent equality. Osteological analysis shows no battle wounds, but cut marks on the ribs. Some scholars interpret this as ritual sacrifice tied to the city's collapse. Others see evidence of epidemic mass burial. Historians are still debating this question. Did the city's leaders sacrifice citizens to appease dying gods, or did plague and famine force communal internment? Continuing south, you reach the Great Compound, once a lavish palace complex. Its peristyle courts now lie with floors peeled up like carpets, revealing layers of pigment stolen by rain. Here you find broken luxury items, jade earspools snapped in half, fineware bowls shattered in place. An obscure hoard discovered under a collapsed bench includes dozens of figurines depicting crowned figures with staring eyes, perhaps portrait effigies of departed rulers. Why bury these symbols of authority so hastily? You brush away debris and uncover a tiny mask of the great goddess, its painted vines still vivid beneath centuries of dust. It's a lonely echo of a power structure that once defined the city's hierarchy. You follow a narrow alley toward a cluster of compounds that show evidence of structural collapse. Wooden beams have collapsed inward, and walls have crumbled without repair. Inside one room, a sacrificial kitchen remains. Grinding stones caked with ochre, obsidian blades scattered on a stone ledge. A small brazier holds hardened lumps of copal resin, as if last used moments before abandonment. You pause to breathe in the resin's faint scent, imagining priests performing final rites beneath the low roof. Up on a terrace, you find a group of archaeologists shining lights into a pit filled with broken pottery and charred human hair. Underneath lies a layer of smashed greenstone beads, each bead split with precision, perhaps a symbolic killing of valuables so they could accompany souls into the afterlife. This practice appears sporadically across the site, suggesting multiple episodes of ritual closure rather than a single event. As the sun climbs, you head toward the outer neighborhoods, where luxury gives way to humble dwellings. Here you find door jambs scratched with tally marks, primitive graffiti noting grain rations or Labor Day's ode. One shelter holds a hastily buried infant swaddled in a simple cloak. No grave goods mark the spot, only a shallow depression. It's a poignant counterpoint to the mass tombs. Even the smallest life here mattered enough to receive a burial, even as the city sagged under its own weight. You reach the edge of the city, where fields of rubble spill into open flats. Ancient canals have silted shut. Terraces once lined with chinampas lie overgrown. A drought event registered in lakebed sediments around 700 CE suggests rainfall dropped to half its normal volume for 2 decades, likely crippling agriculture. You stand beside a dried canal channel, letting the parched wind wash past you. Without reliable harvests, the city's food supply would collapse. Yet the canals here bear signs of attempted repair, new stone linings and reed gates, indicating last efforts to salvage irrigation. Historians are still debating this question. Was catastrophic drought the decisive blow, or merely one factor among political upheaval and social fracture? Beyond the ruined fields, you find distant processional roads that end in nowhere. Causeways abruptly truncated, monuments left half-built. A plinth once meant for a new pyramid stands alone, its base carved but without steps or superstructure. It's as if the builders simply walked away, their tools still lying in a neat pile beside the foundation. You touch the carved glyphic panel at its front, untranslated signs that promised a new sex temple. Now they promise only silence. Returning to the central precinct, you ascend a low mound beside the sun pyramid. From here, you survey the city's remains. Stepped platforms half restored, plazas scarred by fire, tunnels sealed with mortar. The skyline is silent. No worshippers throng the terraces. No smoke drifts from kitchen chimneys. You feel the weight of emptiness press against your chest, a sobering reminder that even the greatest cities can vanish. At dusk, you wander back through the Avenue of the Dead. Braziers once lit in patterns to guide night processions stand empty. You spot a charred post marking a temporary ritual booth, now only a stump of stone and ash. You light a small torch of your own and hold it aloft, feeling the flicker echo across vacant compounds. In that wavering glow, you imagine the city's last inhabitants marching past you, chanting farewell hymns and scattering offerings in the dust. Before you leave, you pause at a low platform near the moon pyramid. Under your lantern, you find dozens of small clay whistles shaped like jaguars, each one snapped in two. This odd cache, discovered last season, suggests someone destroyed playful tokens in a final act of abandonment, perhaps to release their spirits or to curse the city's echo. You pick up a broken piece and feel its hollow throat, as if it once sang a goodbye. You set the fragment down and let your torchlight linger over the blackened steps. Tomorrow, archaeologists will puzzle over these traces. A tapestry of decline woven from fire, water shortage, social rupture, and ritual closure. But tonight, you carry the silence of Teotihuacan in your bones, a testament to the fragility of human empires. Sleep comes slowly under a canopy of stars. You drift off with visions of smoldering plazas, half-built temples, and hurried burials, a mosaic of abandonment as poignant as any act of creation. You arrive at Teotihuacan under a different sky, one painted with the flicker of torchlight and the distant toll of ceremonial drums echoing across centuries. The grand plazas lie silent, but in your mind's ear you hear Aztec pilgrims whispering prayers, their footsteps still dancing on worn stones. You wander past half-collapsed platforms and crumbling stairways, imagining the first Mexica travelers who, in the early 14th century, stumbled upon these ruins and believed they had come upon the birthplace of the gods. As you stand before the Pyramid of the Sun, you sense the weight of a legend that predates written chronicles. By the time the Aztecs founded Tenochtitlan in 1325 CE, they called this place Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods. Mainstream scholarship holds that the Mexica constructed elaborate pilgrimage routes from Lake Texcoco's shore to these moldering outlines of ancient glory, bearing tributes of maize, cotton, and featherwork. You imagine them winding through salt flats and scrubland, their hearts pounding with reverence and anticipation as they approached the gates of a city abandoned for centuries. They came not as archaeologists but as worshippers. According to accounts later recorded by Bernardino de Sahagan, pilgrims called the pyramids Huehue Teotl's throne and left offerings at cracked stucco altars. Some even painted glyphs in their own Nahuatl script onto faded walls, hoping to renew the city's spirit by adding Mexica prayers to ancient murals. An obscure document in the Codex Mendoza mentions small clay whistles shaped like hummingbirds left at the summit, tokens of personal devotion that, if discovered by modern digs, would rewrite our understanding of post-Teotihuacano continuity. You tread the Avenue of the Dead as dawn's glow spills over the Pyramid of the Moon. Here, in the open plaza, Mexica pilgrims reconstructed earthen shrines atop older platforms, using rammed earth techniques that mimic Teotihuacan builders' methods. They consecrated these new altars in ceremonies mixing old gods with new, weaving Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl into the cosmic narrative originally penned long before in Teotihuacan's heyday. You brush your hand along a rebuilt stair edge, feeling the ridges left by Aztec masons who tried to honor an architectural memory they barely understood. Obscure as it seems, one Nahua word from a 16th century chant survives. Yohoquizquitli, he who beckons at twilight. Scholars debate whether this epithet referred to an underworld deity of Teotihuacan origin, or was a Mexica innovation grafted onto their own pantheon. You hum it softly, tasting the old language on your tongue, and sense how myth and memory can bend facts like pliable reed. When Hernán Cortés and his entourage arrived in 1519, they heard local accounts of Teotihuacan's grandeur but largely dismissed them as fairy tales. The Spaniards saw only broken stones and wild vines, uncomprehending that Aztec guides still revered these outlines as sacred. One obscure letter from Cortés's scribe, Andrés de Tapia, remarks on giant steps leading to nothing, betraying a mix of confusion and fascination. You trace the worn steps with your sandal, imagining how those conquistadors mistook cosmic stages for mere curiosities. By the late 18th century, European explorers, drawn by whispers of lost civilizations, began mapping the site in earnest. Alexander von Humboldt measured the pyramid of the sun's height using barometric pressure, noting in his travel journal that the air thinned in strange ways atop those colossal tiers. He sketched crude profiles of the city's grid, thrilled to discover an urban plan rivaling contemporary European capitals. Yet his travels also recorded local oral traditions. Otomi elders told of glowing stone serpents that slithered through ruins at moonrise, a haunting echo of the feathered serpent's power. In the 1880s, Mexican President Porfirio Diaz commissioned Leopoldo Batras to restore Teotihuacan. Batras's team armed themselves with Portland cement and steel trowels, slapping fresh stucco onto pyramid faces in a hurry to showcase national heritage. Today, many criticize his methods. Cement cracks, pigments peel, and original shapes are lost beneath thick overlays. An obscure 1905 report by engineer Juan C. Lastiri complains that Batras's whitewashing obscured genuine architectural details, a cautionary tale for modern preservationists. You walk beneath scaffolding erected by early 20th century archaeologists like Manuel Gamio, whose work blends excavation and anthropology. Gamio pioneered systematic digs, excavating residential compounds with an eye toward daily life rather than grand monuments alone. Thick tome pages orally echo in your head as you pass his numbered trench markers, reminders that Teotihuacan's story extends beyond pyramids into humble courtyards and hidden kivas. Later, in the 1960s, Swedish archaeologist Sigvald Lind used electrical resistivity surveys to peer beneath the plaza's crust without disturbing a single stone. His remote sensing revealed subterranean chambers and sealed tunnels, echoes of ritual corridors never intended for human sight in daylight. Obscure field notes from Lind's team mention faint traces of human hair in vent shafts, hinting at ceremonies conducted in ghostly silence. Yet the more you uncover, the more questions arise. Historians are still debating this question. To what extent did Aztec legends guide modern archaeologists' assumptions about site usage and chronology? Early excavators sometimes sought confirmation of indigenous lore, like subterranean throne rooms of gods, only to find plain storage chambers instead. You peer into one unlit tunnel you've just discovered, half expecting divine footprints but finding only dust motes dancing in your torch beam. In the 1970s and 80s, Mexican institutions reclaimed Teotihuacan as national patrimony, installing walls in Nahuatl alongside Spanish and English signage. Tour guides began reciting Aztec chants before leading visitors up the Pyramid of the Moon, blending showmanship with history. Obscure local variants of these chants, recorded by ethnographers working with Otomi and Mizawa elders, include verses praising the rain god Tlaloc as keepers of the earthen womb, a poetic twist that even seasoned scholars struggle to translate. With the advent of LiDAR mapping in the 21st century, archaeologists have rediscovered vast suburbs of Teotihuacan, mounds and platforms hidden beneath century-old vegetation. These data-rich maps hint at an urban sprawl up to 200 square kilometers, dwarfing the ceremonial core you now traverse. You scroll through a digital model on your tablet, overlaying colonial-era pilgrimage routes in neon lines. It's humbling to see how both legend and technology converge to reshape understanding. Walking past a reconstructed residential compound, you spot modern murals depicting Mexica pilgrims making offerings at ancient plazas. These painted scenes, commissioned by local heritage groups, remind you that Teotihuacan's story is still being written in living paint. Obscure as it seems, one mural shows an Aztec priest wearing a cloak dotted with mica specks, perhaps a nod to that shimmering psychedelic stucco you saw in Section 3. Historians are still debating this question. Did modern Aztecs genuinely preserve elements of Teotihuacan religion through unbroken oral traditions? Or did colonial and post-colonial narratives reinvent the past to serve nationalist aims? Evidence is entangled in centuries of myth-making, stratigraphy, and scholarly bias. As evening falls, you climb the tilted steps of the Pyramid of the Sun for the final time on this journey. The sunset bleeds across the valley in hues of ochre and cinnabar, the very pigments ancient painters and modern restorers vied to perfect. You raise your arms in silent homage, channeling the silent prayers of countless pilgrims, both Mexican and foreign, who tread these platforms in search of something greater than themselves. You close your eyes and let the wind carry the echo of Aztec chants, the hiss of Spanish quills on parchment, and the crackle of modern radio transmissions used by survey teams. The site hums with a chorus of rediscovery. Voices of Aztec priests, colonial friars, early archaeologists, and local custodians blending into a single, complex narrative. Before you depart, you pause at the visitor center where illuminated glyph panels narrate Teotihuacan's legacy through Aztec and contemporary eyes. You trace the carved stone glyph for place of creation and feel the thrum of human memory backing you. Here, at the crossroads of myth and science, the city's secrets remain both tantalizingly close and forever out of reach. In the hush that follows, you step beyond the final signpost and onto the dusty path home. Stars will overhead, and you imagine Aztec pilgrims once navigating by those same constellations. Sleep beckons like a tender god, promising dreams where legend and reality weave into a single tapestry. And as your eyelids fall, you carry with you the layered echoes of Teotihuacan's rediscovery. Myths reborn, stones unearthed, and the gods' faint laughter echoing in every footstep. You arrive at Teotihuacan at first light, but this time you're not alone. Teams of archaeologists, geophysicists, and conservators fan out across the site, armed with drones, ground-penetrating radar, and DNA swabs rather than just trowels and brushes. Tonight, you'll witness the city in the age of high technology. Remote sensing that peels back centuries of Earth without a single shovel, microscopic analyses that decode pigments no human eye can see, and tunnel systems rediscovered beneath temple cores. You walk amid this bustle, sneakers crunching fresh gravel laid over new walkways, and you sense the pulse of discovery quickening in every corner. Your first stop is the Pyramid of the Moon's eastern flank, where a temporary platform of scaffolding ascends to a sealed tunnel entrance discovered only last year. Mainstream reports date this tunnel's construction to around 200 CE, but it lay hidden until LiDAR surveys mapping subtle elevation changes revealed a linear void beneath the plaza. You climb the steel stairs alongside a team from the National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH, trading jokes with a young geophysicist about whether battery-powered drills count as sacrilege. As you tiptoe into the narrow passage, your headlamp reveals pristine walls. No soot, no plaster. Evidence the tunnel was never used for surface ceremonies, but perhaps for clandestine rites or secret burials. At the tunnel's midpoint, you pause beneath an intact lintel carved with miniature talud motifs. Conservators shine LED torches on delicate footprints stamped into plaster. A child's shoes or perhaps a small animal, remarkably preserved in the sealed environment. Obscure research out of UNAM identified trace levels of an unusual fungal melanin in the plaster's pores, hinting at microbial communities that helped protect the prints over millennia. You crouch to run your finger along the faded mark, marveling that a tiny footprint can endure when whole pyramids succumb to weathering. Emerging from the tunnel, you head south to a newly excavated residential compound in the Teotihuacan neighborhood. Here, archaeologists have uncovered vivid murals depicting scenes never before seen. Women stirring pulque vats under a canopy of stylized vines. Men in feathered cloaks brandishing ceremonial axes. The pigments glow in ultraviolet light, revealing layers of overpainting where ancient restorers repainted murals centuries ago. A conservator chuckles as she explains that infrared spectroscopy detected traces of a rare mineral called jarosite, a byproduct of acid rain that formed only after the murals were abandoned and exposed to a changing atmosphere. That scientific twist underscores how natural processes can both obscure and preserve ancient art. You follow the excavation trench into the heart of the compound, where a sunken plaza yields a cache of miniature ceramic whistles shaped like eagles. Each whistle is stamped with a cluster of dots, an early counting notation that carbon-14 dates to the city's decline around 600 CE. Scholars debate whether these whistles were used in children's games, household rituals, or recruitment ceremonies for young apprentices. Historians are still debating this question. Were these whistles playful toys repurposed for ritual, or sacred instruments minted by elite workshops? The answer hovers in the gray zone between context and conjecture. Midday finds you at the Pyramid of the Sun summit, joined by a multinational team preparing to deploy ground-penetrating radar across the broad platform. As you sweep the radar wand back and forth, you see ghostly anomalies on the screen, parallel voids hinting at previously unknown chambers. Obscure pilot studies at the University of Bonn suggest that similar patterns in other pyramids mark storage rooms for ritual paraphernalia, not burial chambers. You imagine hidden shelves lined with ceremonial vessels or obsidian blades preserved by the stable temperatures underground. Your heart hammers at the thought of what lies beneath your feet. Leaving the summit, you trek toward the southern suburbs, where LiDAR has exposed a highway-like causeway leading into what may have been industrial quarter. You step past clusters of circular earthworks, ancient lime kilns still retaining heat signatures detectable by thermal imaging. On site, a chemist scoops powdered residue from a kiln interior. Later mass spectrometry will reveal traces of up to 5 different fuels: pine, oak, agave, and 2 unknown woods, evidence of resource mixing to achieve optimal firing temperatures. You grin at that obscure detail. Ancient engineers may have been pyromaniacal alchemists long before the age of fire. Nearby, you pause at a newly revealed platform where drone photogrammetry captured high-resolution imagery of faint step patterns carved into bedrock. These patterns, virtually invisible at human scale, form part of a sun compass aligning the platform precisely to equinox sunrise. Historians are still debating this question. Did Teotihuacan astronomers use such micro-aligned platforms as observatories? Or were they symbolic reminders of cosmic order? The digital models invite you to peer at every groove, but human certainty yaws at the edge of each rasterized pixel. As afternoon heat peaks, you find refuge in the central palace compound, beneath a canopy of protective nets shading a newly stabilized mural of the great goddess. You watch conservators using tiny scalpels under microscopes to remove decades-old cement repairs by Batrice, revealing layers of ochre and malachite underneath. An obscure publication from the 1990s predicted that beneath these overcoats lay a second, darker mural depicting a female figure with a crocodilian headdress, potentially the source of Zapotec legends of the Water Mother. You lean close as a fragment peels away, heart racing at each flake lifted from stone. A few steps away, you enter a climate-controlled chamber housing human remains exhumed from a 2023 dig beneath a minor temple. Osteologists invite you to inspect a rib showing embedded microshards of obsidian, evidence of ritual self-inflicted bloodletting. Isotope analysis of that same rib reveals elevated nitrogen ratios, suggesting a protein-heavy diet in these individuals, perhaps priests or elite warriors. Obscure journals debate whether those priests were Teotihuacan's enforcers in distant provinces, exported to uphold civic order. You gently touch the bone's surface through a plastic barrier, mindful of both respect and revelation. Leaving the chamber, you head north to a cluster of modern test pits where sediment coring has yielded continuous pollen records stretching back 2,500 years. From this data, palynologists reconstruct a dramatic shift. A spike in aloe pollen around 650 CE, evidence of landscape overharvesting and desertification linked to population pressures. Historians are still debating this question. Did environmental degradation hasten Teotihuacan's downfall, or was it a symptom of state fragmentation? The pistachio-colored cores in your hand vibrate with data points but whisper no easy answers. You follow a narrow track to a hillside overlook where paleobotanists tend a small experimental garden growing ancient maize landraces revived from charred seed remains. You bite a tender cob, tasting kernels smaller than modern hybrids but bursting with sweet, nutty flavor. As you chew, you admire that obscure effort, bringing 2,000-year-old crop strains back to life in living laboratories. It's an act of cultural reclamation that bridges past and present in the language of flavor. As dusk falls, you gather with researchers around a portable LiDAR scanner set inside one of the last unexcavated mounds. You watch as the scanner's beams dance across gravel surfaces, constructing a 3D mesh of every stone and fissure. In that digital echo, you glimpse new platforms waiting to be uncovered, new texts to be read in pigment residues, and new human stories trapped in the layers of soil. Historians are still debating this question. Will Teotihuacan's final mysteries yield to technology, or do they lie forever beyond the reach of even the most sophisticated sensors? Before you leave the site, you pause at a lookout over the Avenue of the Dead. Drones hover overhead like silent falcons, relaying high-resolution infrared maps to teams back at base camp. Below, torchlights flicker inside newly reopened tunnels, and the distant hum of generators underscores ancient rhythms. You breathe in the evening air, tasting dust and possibility, and realize the city, once lost to legend, now hums with renewed life, not in the people who built it, but in the minds and tools of those who seek it. You stand at the edge of the Avenue of the Dead one last time, the sunrise casting long fingers of gold across the plaza's plastered surfaces. All around you, the pyramids and compounds have fallen silent again, but their echoes reverberate through modern streets, galleries, and classrooms halfway around the world. Tonight, you'll trace Teotihuacan's enduring legacy, from 20th century urban planners to street artists in Mexico City, and explore the deep mysteries still entombed in buried chambers and worn glyphs that no one has yet deciphered. You begin by walking south along the avenue, noting how its geometry inspired the 1920s urban plan for Mexico City's Boulevard Reforma. Mainstream scholarship credits Teotihuacan with the world's earliest large-scale grid urban design, an innovation imitated by planners seeking order and grandeur. Reforma's median promenades, axial vistas, and monumental roundabouts reflect the ancient model, as if the spirit of Teotihuacan's planners lives on in every avenue straight enough to split the skyline. In the lobby of a nearby museum, you admire a massive mural by Diego Rivera depicting Teotihuacan's scene. Pyramids colored in pastel lime, workers hauling baskets of earth, and gods looking down through fractured niches. Rivera's 1940s masterpiece cemented public awareness of Teotihuacan in Mexican national identity. Yet an obscure footnote in his diary reveals he based some details on engravings in an 18th century mining report, meaning his historical painting mixes authentic ruins with imaginary tunnels described by miners drunk on pulque. You smile at the thought. Even in art, Teotihuacan's reality and legend intertwine. Stepping outside, you catch a tram toward the neighborhood of La Merced, where street artists paint feathered serpent mosaics on soaring walls. Here, talatablero shapes recur not on pyramids but on building facades, a vernacular tribute to ancestral forms. One artist tells you he learned the profile from postcards sold at the archaeological site's gift shop, an unlikely source for an official emblem, but proof that Teotihuacan's iconography thrives in grassroots creativity. You ride the tram past a UNESCO plaque dedicated in 1987, celebrating Teotihuacan's status as a World Heritage Site. Mainstream heritage discourse praises its universal value. Teotihuacan stands as a testimony to the ingenuity of pre-Hispanic urban civilizations. The inscription reads, yet some local activists point out that tourist infrastructure, souvenir stalls, paved walkways, and overpriced guidebooks has commodified the site, distancing it from Otomi and Misawa communities who live just beyond the park borders. Historians are still debating this question. Does heritage tourism preserve living traditions, or does it fossilize a past that belongs to local descendants? You change course and head to an urban lab at UNAM, where GIS specialists overlay satellite imagery on historical maps of Teotihuacan's wetlands. Their models reconstruct ancient lake-edge topography, showing how human engineering drained and channeled water for Chinampa agriculture. One obscure graph reveals methane gas fluxes recorded in lake sediments, a hint that ancient canals created microhabitats where fish and waterfowl thrived in tandem with crops. Contemporary ecological planners look to these findings for sustainable wetland management, closing a circle from the ancient city's innovations to modern environmental challenges. Later you drop in on a molecular archaeology seminar, where graduate students present DNA sequences recovered from human bone fragments unearthed beneath residential compounds. Mainstream genetic studies show a mix of local valley lineages and mitochondrial haplotypes from Oaxaca and the Gulf Coast, evidence of a diverse, multi-ethnic populace forming Teotihuacan's social fabric. Yet, an obscure recent paper suggests traces of Amazonian ancestry in a handful of samples, implying trade or pilgrimage routes deeper than previously imagined. Historians are still debating this question. Did Teotihuacan's cosmopolitanism extend into South America? Or are the genetic signals mere contamination? Even the city's language remains a puzzle. No writing system comparable to Maya glyphs has been conclusively identified at Teotihuacan. Only isolated signs and pseudoglyphs painted on walls. One fragmentary inscription near the feathered Serpent temple resembles the early Zapotec script, but scholars can't agree whether it records Teotihuacano speech or is a borrowed motif. Historians are still debating this question. Did Teotihuacanos maintain a script that vanished when the city fell, or did they rely on oral tradition alone, trusting memory rather than carved signs? Your next stop is the National Anthropology Museum, where a fragmented greenstone mask from the Moon Pyramid's tunnel is displayed under glass. Its features are eerily lifelike, with drilled eye holes that stare back at you. Mainstream interpretation labels it as a deity's effigy, but an obscure analysis of its mineral composition found traces of lapis lazuli, a stone sourced from Afghanistan. If confirmed, this would upend our understanding of pre-Columbian trade networks. Historians are still debating this question. Was lapis lazuli a sacred import carried by trans-Pacific vessels, or is the analysis an artifact of modern contamination? Stepping outside, you stroll through Chapultepec Park, reflecting on how park designers in the 1930s modeled its paths on Teotihuacan's Avenue of the Dead, seeking that same sense of processional drama and spatial hierarchy. You pause at a fountain shaped like a stepped pyramid, its waters echoing the sacred pools once used for divination. Families picnic on its terraces, children scampering up faux pyramid steps, oblivious to the site's millennia-old origins. As evening approaches, you climb the Pyramid of the Sun once more, following a stream of visitors drawn by the site's Instagram fame. Selfie sticks flourish like ritual staffs, and the click of cameras competes with the wind in your ears. You marvel that a city abandoned for 1,300 years now pulses with digital life, its images shared across continents in seconds. Yet an obscure study of social media geotags suggests that only 5% of tourists actually take time to read a single plaque about Teotihuacan's history. The rest snap photos and move on. Historians are still debating this question. Does social media democratize heritage engagement, or reduce a profound cultural landscape to background decor? At the summit, you stand where ancient priests once offered copal to the sky, and you too lift a deep breath, the air tinged with dust and possibility. Below you, the city spreads out like a blueprint of human ambition, a network of stones and stories that refuse to be silent. You feel the tug of unsolved riddles, the builder's identity, the ruler's names, the vanished language, the motives behind ritual closure. You linger as stars prick the darkening sky, each pinprick echoing a question yet to be answered. The remains of Teotihuacan are more than monuments. They are open-ended prompts for human curiosity. Every excavation pit, every chemical assay, every pixel of LiDAR data is a conversation across time, a debate between what was, what is, and what could be known. Now, the wind that once carried the echoes of chanting priests whistles softly around you, full of patience and gentle hush. Your heartbeat slows as the night settles, pulling the world under a soft indigo blanket. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the city at peace, its stones dreaming of distant suns and rising moons, its walls whispering lullabies of earth and sky. Feel the pulse of history dissolve into the quiet breath of now. There are truths you've carried from this journey, something of human ambition, ingenuity, and the enduring mystery that lingers when the light fades. Let them drift through your mind like motes of dust in a sunbeam, each one a spark of wonder glimmering in the dark. You are here, at the threshold between the known and the unknown, cradled by pyramids older than languages, older even than memory. Surrender to the hush. Listen for the soft footfalls of ancestors treading lightly through your dreams. Let each exhale carry away questions you must leave behind until morning.